The House will come to order.
I don't know what goes first. Okay. Then what's next? Where's that?
Representative Hillstrom, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to a point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in the gallery today are representatives from the Vietnamese community of Minnesota and the Fellowship of Republic of the Vietnam Servicemen. And Madam Speaker, we have a resolution that we would like to read to the body. Members, a House resolution honoring April 30th, 2015 as Vietnamese Remembrance Day. Whereas April 30th of 2015 marks 40 years since the fall of Saigon, signifying the surrender of the Republic of Vietnam and the end of the Vietnam War, and the beginning of an era during which Vietnamese refugees were driven from their home country, and I yield to Representative Moran.
Whereas those that survived their journey in search of peace and freedom left behind their families, livelihoods, and homeland for a chance to build a new life, and I would like to yield to Representative Knobloch.
Whereas over 23,000 Vietnamese Americans now call Minnesota home, making significant contributions to a strong and robust state, enriching its diversity, culture, and economy. And Madam Speaker, I would yield to Representative Lane.
Thank you. I would, whereas preservation of the Vietnamese language, culture, and heritage honors Vietnamese elders' steadfast commitment to family and roots Vietnamese Americans in a unified identity, and Madam Speaker, I would like to yield to Representative Nelson.
And whereas Vietnamese Americans believe we must heal from our communities' shared trauma of war and displacement to grow and progress as healthy Minnesotans by remembering who we are and where we came from, embodying the strength of will, the spirit of preservation, the human character's resilience, and now therefore I will go to Representative Hillstrom.
Be it therefore resolved by the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration of the House of Representatives of the State of Minnesota that it honors April 30th, 2015 as Vietnamese Remembrance Day. Dated April 29th, 2015, Kurt Doubt, Speaker, Minnesota House of Representatives, Joyce Pepin, Chair, Rules of Legislative Administration, and myself, Deborah Hillstrom, State Representative. Members, I'm going to ask that you join me in a moment of silence to remember those who are being honored here today.
Members, please rise for a moment of silence. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1444. I recognize Representative, excuse me, the clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1444, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to real property.
I recognize the gentleman from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The House File 1444, excuse me, it was House File 1472, and we've substituted the Senate language on this. There were some technical corrections that were made in the Senate. This bill does two things as it relates to mortgage foreclosure here in the state of Minnesota. The first thing it does is it allows for and provides clarification for mortgagors or borrowers who are facing foreclosure here in the state of Minnesota to be able to delay the foreclosure by notifying the lender for a period of up to 5 months. Should the lender, should the borrower ask for that delay, we would then have a 5-week statutory redemption in the state of Minnesota after the sheriff's sale. Secondly, what the bill would do is it would clarify that should that mortgage become in default a second time, that it does not allow that property owner or borrower to be able to get that second advantage of postponing the sale. It would follow the current state law. Secondly, what it does is it provides some consumer protection for middle-class families who may be facing foreclosure on their property, that upon request of the lender has 3 days to provide the borrower with a payoff number to pay off that mortgage. Secondly, that number needs to be good for a period of up to 7 days. Again, we want to take care of putting some consumer protection in here and some clarification in Minnesota statute that was passed a few years ago. Members, the Minnesota Bar Association is supportive of this, and I also know that you will be receiving from the pages a letter from Legal Aid saying that they also are in concurrence with this, and I'm not aware of any opposition. Members, I encourage a yes vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Is there any further discussion to the bill? There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 1444.
Third reading. Representative O'Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, members, my opinion on how you should vote hasn't changed in the last 10 seconds. Please vote yes.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll. Representative Allen votes aye. Representative Pinto votes aye. Representative Clark votes aye. Representative Hansen votes aye. Representative Metza votes aye. Oh. Okay. Yep, members, the roll call is open. You may still use your buttons. These right here. This is vote open, vote closed. Okay. I already announced Clark, so I need to announce her again. I recognize names. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Clark. Representative Clark votes aye. Representative Allen. Representative Allen votes aye.
126 to 1.
There being 126 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is passed and is title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is Senate File 1147. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File Number 1147, number 6 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to real property.
I recognize the author, Representative O'Driscoll, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I'd like to thank my co-authors on this bill, Representatives Pawlowski, Hoppe, Scott, and Adkins. Again, this is legislation that helps to clarify mortgage foreclosure language in the state of Minnesota. In the state of Minnesota, if you do a foreclosure by advertisement, you are required to publish in the legal section of the newspaper at least 6 consecutive publications, 1 each week. In the past, there's been some question as to what publications may qualify as that official posting. This bill simply provides clarification that if newspaper is domiciled in the county in which the property is located, that would be an acceptable newspaper. If not, the newspaper in a neighboring county that is domiciled in a neighboring county would be an acceptable newspaper as well. So for example, where I come from in the St. Cloud area, the tri-counties of Stearns, Benton, and Sherburne all converge in the city of St. Cloud. The St. Cloud Times would be an acceptable publication because it is either in that city or county or is adjacent to. It simply provides clarification for lenders and borrowers alike. And Madam Speaker, I'd encourage a green vote.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 1147.
Third reading, Representative O'Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, once again, I encourage members to vote yes.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 127 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 294. The clerk will report the bill.
House File Number 294, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to insurance.
I recognize Representative Loonan to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This bill deals with small businesses that go through the effort and apply the resources for their employees to be proactive regarding health care. I've got right down the hill from my home an employer in this very situation where not for the sake of reduced health care costs, but for increased productivity, create a window of time during the day for the employees to get out, get active, go working, play basketball, volleyball, things like that, because they see a dramatic increase in productivity for people in sedimentary jobs. However, what they also noticed was it had a correlation or effect on the cost of their health care regarding the loss ratios. Now, when those companies decide to self-insure to take advantage of that very situation where they now have a healthier group of employees, what they run up against is here in Minnesota, they're going to self-insure for the first part of any losses. The major medical contract that they get on top of that to cover them for anything catastrophic cannot have a deductible smaller than $20,000. If you're an employer with 40 employees, you now have a $20,000 deductible per person. What Bill 294 proposes to do is to allow that policy to have a attachment point or deductible down to $6,500, putting it in line with what other states are allowing. What this does, there's something in this bill for everybody. We've got the advocates of proactive living, healthier existence, riding your bike to work, being active, this encourages that and gives a natural incentive to do that. Over on this side of the aisle, there are no mandates here. It doesn't require an employer to do it. It doesn't allow an employer to require an employee to do it. This is a true free market improvement, allowing the advantages and all the upsides of creating a proactive medical situation to fall to the people that are putting in the effort. This is a classic example of the fact that the future of healthcare is going to be health. And I ask for your support on the bill.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Atkins moves to amend House File Number 294, the first engrossment, and the amendment is coded A15-0651.
Representative Atkins, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Loonan, for bringing this bill. This amendment literally just came up in the last week or so. It's actually regarding a constituent of Representative Mason's. And something happened to that constituent that actually shocked me. And it takes a lot when you got this much gray hair like I do. It takes a lot to shock you. But this did. What this person had was a disability plan, and she then suffered a disability. She made a claim under the plan, and Representative Loonan and I talked about what happened next, which was we both assumed, and I think Chairman Davids and Chairman Hoppy would tell you the same thing, as far as past Commerce chairs, we assumed what would happen was that she would have her doctor, because there was a dispute, she'd have her doctor, the plan would have its doctor, and then a third-party neutral doctor would make the decision on whether or not she qualified for disability. But we found something that I had never seen in Minnesota before, and in checking with some lawyers, it's a rarity, but it's something that just drives them crazy. And that is that there is a clause in certain insurance policies here in Minnesota that says it's entirely within the discretion of the plan to make the decision, Mr. Speaker. So they don't have to listen to the doctors, they don't have to appoint doctors, they don't have to go through any of that. They just have the ability on their own, within their own discretion, to make the decision. Now, across the country, you see states across the country that have already done away with this. They've banned this sort of provision, whether it's unconstitutional or it doesn't give the insured or the plan participant their due process, their ability to make their argument. But it's just patently unfair when one party gets to make the decision and there's nothing else that needs to come into the decision-making process. So it really surprised Representative Loonan and I. I suspect it would have surprised Representative Davids, Representative Hoppy, the chairs of the Commerce Committee over the years, that this provision is even allowed in Minnesota. And so that's what this amendment does, is it says that we're going to join all those other states across the country that have said that you can't have this one-sided position where the plan can make the decision in its own discretion without having to take into account what the individual doctors may say, which is what we were assuming was the case. So that's what the amendment does. With that, I'd appreciate members' support, and I'd ask for a roll call, please.
A roll call being requested, and seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Any further discussion on the Atkins amendment? The member from Dakota, Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, in Minnesota, as Representative Atkins has said, we have a very, very unusual discretionary clause in some of the long-term disability plans. And the deal is, if somebody has been injured, say in a car accident, or if they have a very difficult illness, if anything changes within what's happening with them, the insurance company can just automatically say that they no longer are able to receive the benefits. And what is so bad about this is the only alternative the patient has is to actually go into court, but it's not about the court looking at whether the decision is right or wrong, whether the patient needs what their doctor is telling them. All they can do is say they have to be able to prove that the plan or the administrator of the plan did anything wrong. They're not allowed to bring to the court the fact that the patient itself, herself or himself, still needs further benefits. And that is what is so very wrong about this. We're only one of 12 states that has this discretionary clause. Even Texas does not have this clause. So that tells you how bad this is. Again, I ask for your support of this amendment.
The member from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Sorry about that. I rise, Representative Atkins, Representative Mason. I think this is a very good amendment, and I think there's some great things in here. Unfortunately, I don't think it necessarily fits the bill here, and there's some issues. But before we go that and look at ruling this out of order, I'm wondering if Representative Atkins would yield for a question. Representative Atkins, we had a short conversation about this.
He will yield.
Thank you. Representative Atkins, we had a short conversation about this. I know Representative Loonan and Representative Mason were involved. Is this something we could maybe work on in the interim? Would you consider withdrawing it? I'm just going to ask you before we go any further.
Representative Atkins.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Kresha, thank you for the question. Yes, I'd be happy to work on it in the interim. I'd actually like to solve it today if we might. And, you know, I expect you're going to make the motion on germaneness, and that's fine. But I do believe it's a very valuable discussion to have, and if it could go on today, that would be even better.
Representative Kresha.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Atkins, I believe that, and I believe in the spirit of what we're trying to do, and I think we'll get there. But unfortunately, I rise to a point of order of Rule 3.21 of the House Rules, Mr. Speaker, and I'm prepared to offer advice.
Advice, Representative Kresha.
I think under germaneness, I think this is a good idea, and I think, members, that we could try to find a solution. It's going to take a little bit of time. Unfortunately, the underlying bill addresses stop-loss limits, and it's not an appropriate avenue at this time. So at this point, I would ask that we rule the order well taken, Mr. Speaker.
Advice? Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't rise under advice terribly often, so I hope that that part of the advice is meaningful to you. But when I do, I tend to be right, I think. Point number one is this is within 60A. You know how we do amendments sometimes, Mr. Speaker, where we go back and we tell a reviser, I know this isn't really in 60A, but it'd sure be great if you'd put it there. Just put it in 60A so that I can say that it's relevant to the whatever the underlying bill is. Well, in this case, folks, this is right squarely within 60A, Mr. Speaker, and I'd suggest, in fact, if there's a page that would be kind enough to come get this from me, hey, page folks down there, I made a copy of the statute for you. 38 times disability plans are referenced within Section 60A. So you got to take that up there to the Speaker. Thank you, sir. 38 times within just this section, disability plans are referenced. And then the second point more specifically, in the language, Mr. Speaker, that I highlighted for you, it says right squarely in there that self-insurance or insurance plans, now I'm referencing here subdivision 8.2D, so self-insurance plans, and Representative Kresha, Representative Loonan, we're talking about self-insured plans in this amendment, means a plan for the benefit of employees providing life, medical or hospital care, accident, sickness, or disability insurance. So Representative Kresha, exactly the point that we're talking about in the underlying bill of disability insurance is what this amendment is about. It's not only in the chapter, it's in the definition section. So it's actually germane. And I would appreciate, Mr. Speaker, if you find with that understanding then that the point is not well taken.
Additional advice? Advice from Representatives Kresha and Representative Atkins. I'm going to rule that we do have a germaneness issue because I do believe that this does fall under a situation where the amendment would change the general theme of the bill where we haven't had proper hearings on this, and so I'm going to rule this out of order. The clerk will report the amendment.
Point of parliamentary
Murphy,
inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Thiessen, state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Can you just point to me the part of the rule where whether a bill has had a hearing or not is relevant to the germaneness ruling?
The clerk will report the amendment.
Murphy E. moves to amend House File number...
Mr. Speaker, I had a point of parliamentary inquiry. It was actually a serious point of parliamentary inquiry. I've just never heard that whether a hearing is had or not is relevant to germaneness. I mean, we're setting a precedent here, so I hope you could explain to the body what that is.
Representative Thiessen, I have made a ruling under 3.21, and that is my ruling. The clerk will report the amendment.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
Representative Thiessen, state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you. So whenever anybody I suppose either anybody in the body now raises an amendment that has not had a hearing in committee, it will be ruled non-germane?
Representative Thiessen, every amendment that does come before this chamber is independent, and I'm looking at whether it meets the standard of whether it is germane to the bill at hand, and I've made my ruling under 3.21. The clerk will report the amendment.
Murphy E. moves to amend House File number 294, the first engrossment, and the amendment is coded A2.
Representative Murphy E., to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Just so we're all on notice, this bill has not had a hearing. But I think it's important for Minnesota. This is the CHEER Act one more time. This is about making sure that women have access to affordable contraception. I had it up the other night. You ruled it out of, it was ruled out of order very quickly. And we've had this long debate in this body, over whether or not abortion should be legal. And as I have said many times, both in committee and now on the floor, I think that the place where we can find common purpose and common ground is by preventing unwanted pregnancies. And the way to do that is to make sure people have good information and access to contraception. The Supreme Court's decision on Hobby Lobby has given employers new grounds to deny access to contraception, and I think women who are in work and have access to employer-based coverage should also have access to affordable contraception, and the CHEER Act, which is this amendment, provides for that. I'd ask for your support. And I'd like a roll call, please, Mr. Speaker.
A roll call being requested, and seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard from women all over the state. I have a sack full of postcards from women who are interested in this and support this. And I hope that we're paying attention to that we're listening together to the voices of women and their families. This is not just health care. This is an economic issue for women and their families, and it's an important issue for this session. Thank you.
Discussion to the Murphy Amendment. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise under Rule 3.21 and under a point of order. And I have advice.
State your point of order and your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We discussed a similar amendment the other night, and again, I appreciate your passion for the issue, Representative Murphy. Ensuring that women and families have the tools to protect the value of life is incredibly important. However, this amendment greatly expands the scope of this bill, which deals with stop-loss limits rather than coverage requirements on coverage disclosures. And further, Mr. Speaker, the very similar amendment from the other night was coded in a different chapter. I'm not sure if that chapter is the appropriate venue, but I'm fairly certain that this isn't the appropriate part of law to address a coverage requirement issue. And with that, I would ask that the Speaker rule the A2 out of order.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto, state your advice.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Scott acknowledged that this amendment is germane. She said this expands the scope of the bill, and therefore, of course, it's connected with the bill. It couldn't expand that scope without being connected to it. Both the bill and the amendment relate to health plans and relate to coverage, et cetera. And Mr. Speaker, I think that the acknowledgement, there's no reference in 3.21 to how much the scope of the underlying bill is changed. The question is it germane? Is it connected? And I appreciate the remarks of Representative Scott in acknowledging that, in fact, there is that connection.
The member from Dakota, Representative Adkins, advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I have two pieces of advice, but they conflict with one another, Mr. Speaker. So I hope you'll give them equal consideration. The first is, it's now the custom and usage of the House that if a bill has not been heard in committee, it is not germane. And on that basis, I don't believe that this bill was heard in committee, Representative Murphy, which means that based on your previous ruling, it would not be, the point of order should be well taken. That being said, I happen to disagree with that ruling, Mr. Speaker. I think you were just wrong. But you've set a precedent now that we're going to have to live by for the rest of the session. My argument would be, and if you still have this available to you, if you look at the statute itself. By the way, the other day, Mr. Speaker, I did not rise to defend Representative Murphy's because she put it in the wrong chapter. She shoehorned it in there. She told the reviser to put it, I think she may have told the reviser to put it there. This is where it fits. 60A is a very wide jurisdiction, but not only that, we're within the self-insurance portion. That is where she placed her amendment, and by definition, the claims paying that she talks about in her amendment falls squarely within the Loonan bill, or within Chapter 60A. So unless you go with your previous ruling about any bill that didn't get a hearing and follow that, the fact is, Mr. Speaker, it is germane, and we ought to vote on it. So the point of order should not be well taken.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Davney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice?
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Scott several times referenced that this amendment had been offered previously and at that time ruled out of order, and that therefore you should rule this out of order. However, in your last ruling, you established after a line of questioning from Leader Thiessen that each decision by the Speaker on germaneness is independent from any and all previous decisions on germaneness by the Speaker. So given that, Representative Scott's references to past decisions, now custom and uses that you just established for the body, is immaterial. And given that, and given Representative Atkins' observations about this amendment being clearly, squarely in the appropriate statute, I ask that you find the Scott point of order not well taken.
Advice? The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson S.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, when you look at the House Rules 3.21, it says a motion or proposition on a subject different from that under consideration must not be admitted under the guise of its being an amendment. When you look at the amendment offered by Representative Murphy, this is vastly different from the piece of legislation that we have before us with the Loonan Bill, House File 294. For that reason, Mr. Speaker, I would recommend that you rule this point of order is well taken.
Representative Murphy.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I am looking at House File 294, which is drawn to the General Insurance Chapter 60A, and my amendment, which is drawn to 60A. And further, if you look at the contents of the General Insurance Chapter, there is an exemption for fraternal organizations such as the Masons, Odd Fellows, etc. And this amendment brings into that an exemption for religious beliefs. So tying neatly into the insurance, the General Insurance Chapter, the amendment, the CHEER Act is about insurance coverage. It is suited for the General Insurance Chapter. It is hard for me to imagine that you could find this not germane, and so I would ask that you rule the point of order not well taken.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Mr. Speaker, having been up in that chair myself a few years ago and having had to make some rulings on germaneness, I think it's really important that you take a moment and really think about the effect of the ruling that you're about to make. And I know on the last ruling, I think the Speaker got into a bit of trouble. And I know it's very nerve-wracking to be in that chair and be called upon to make these kinds of decisions, but I think we see that the people who do that job the best are the ones who really try their darndest to be nonpartisan and fair, because really the integrity of this entire body depends on it. And there are some speakers, I must say, on the other side, I think Representative Davids, for example, is one that I actually respect a great deal when he's in the chair and see how he manages the House. But I think it's very important that when there's a ruling on a subject like this that's so important about whether we're going to actually end up voting on a matter or not, that every member of this body needs to have absolute confidence in the way that those decisions are made, and that you take whatever time you need to really make the decision based on whatever facts are before you, so that you can be consistent. And I know that's very difficult to do, but that I hope that you will do that, because I think we've seen in this entire session a lot of very partisan rulings, and I have unfortunately felt that this body has really is really losing some of what makes us a great place to serve, and that is that at the end of the day that we all respect the institution and rely on it. And so I would just ask you, Mr. Speaker, to think carefully about your ruling, and don't worry about which side it falls on, and to just really think carefully and only about the rule before you and the bill before you, and make your decision on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, after having received advice from members from Representative Scott on down through Representatives Liebling, and having studied the amendment and having studied the bill, I find that the point of order is well taken. The clerk will give the bill its...
Mr. Speaker?
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Murphy, state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Twice, on behalf of women and families across the state, I have tried to move this amendment, the CHEER Act, and twice, I think because some members, Republican members of your caucus are afraid to vote for this, that it's been ruled out of order. So my point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker, is if general insurance law is not the right place for legislation dealing with insurance, where is the right place, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Murphy, you're presenting a hypothetical situation, and so therefore I'm still staying with my ruling, and it is out of order.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My point of parliamentary inquiry is really I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss, right? This is insurance We're talking about insurance. Representative Loonan's bill is about insurance. My amendment is about insurance. We're talking about the general insurance chapter. You're consistently ruling me out of order on this piece of legislation. This is not a hypothetical, and this is a real-life situation for women across the state of Minnesota for their health. And it appears to me the leadership of this caucus, or of this House of Representatives, wants to deny this discussion by using parliamentary tricks, stretching the rules of this House in a way that make them unrecognizable. And so I'm asking a point of parliamentary inquiry, if not here, where? It's not a hypothetical question. It's a question. I'm seeking your advice, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Murphy, it is again difficult for me to give me advice on the type of parliamentary inquiry that you are bringing forward. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 294.
Representative Loonan, to your bill.
Mr. Speaker and members, again, this bill has something in it for everyone. The people that understand there's a relationship between healthy living and medical costs, and the people on our side of the aisle that are adverse to mandates. This doesn't mandate anything. This simply eliminates a situation, an existing statute, that makes it unplausible for a small business to take advantage of the efforts and the resources they put into a healthier workforce. I ask for a green vote.
Representative Considine, the member from Blue Earth.
I rise to support this bill. Both Representative Loonan and myself have been told that exercise is good, and we tend to believe it. Actually, the place that I was employed for a number of years, Blue Earth County, did have a similar program where they would pay for part of a health membership, because it had been proven that by getting out and exercising, the county's health insurance bills went down. So I think this makes sense. I think it's a good idea to try to encourage people other than Mr. Representative Loonan and myself to exercise. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This bill actually has nothing to do with wellness and promoting it. Every single workplace can do that, and many of them do, small employers and large. Public health agencies throughout the state are working with small employers to do this. This law before us has nothing to do with wellness programs. What it has to do is with our small businesses and how much risk are they going to take in insuring their employees. And we have two markets in Minnesota. We have the fully insured market that we have passed many laws on this body to protect consumers, to make sure they have rights to appeals, that they have that gives the basic rules of the market in our state laws. Or Congress created another option, which is the self-insured or ERISA plans. And the self-insured ERISA plans were created by Congress for the big companies. And it was because of big companies like airlines that said, we've got employees in every single state of this nation, and it's really too complicated for us to say, if you work in Wisconsin, these are the laws, and if you work in Iowa, these are the laws, and if you work in New York, this is what your insurance policy is. They'd have to have basically 50 different insurance policies. And so Congress said, you're big, you're sophisticated, you've got lots of money, you can handle the financial risk of being a self-insured plan, because a self-insured plan isn't buying insurance. They're buying financial protection because they're responsible for every health bill. So if they get an employee who has that $1 million baby, actually nowadays they're more like $2 or $3 million babies, they're protected by that stop loss. So they kind of hedge their bets. We've always allowed the largest employers to do that, and they are pretty sophisticated and know what they're doing. Our small businesses have tended to be in our fully insured market. And this would end, they buy, but some of them step up to self-insurance and they buy reinsurance. Reinsurance protects them against their losses. The bill before us lowers the standard at which they can buy reinsurance from the current $20,000 to as low as $6,500, as I understand it, or twice the amount of the deductible. This is against the model insurance provisions of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Our Commerce Department has testified against it on that basis, and because it can lead to adverse selection. When you're self-insured, they do get to consider age. You're no longer in the big market. So if you're a small mom and pop place and been very loyal and have a lot of older workers with bigger risks, that's going to influence your rates. I think we ought to stay with our National Association of Insurance Commissioners standards and not destabilize the market for our smallest employers with this proposal.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Loeffler, I appreciate your comments and I appreciate your concern. I share some of those concerns. This is a bill, quite frankly, this pits the Chamber of Commerce and NFIB small business versus some very large health insurers here in Minnesota. And I kind of like it when the two of them pick on each other rather than picking on stuff that I'm doing. So it's sort of interesting to see. But on balance, this makes it a little easier for small employers to self-insure. Right now, it's a very challenging process. It's a very costly process. This makes it a little bit easier to do that, and it lines up with the way that most other states have done it across the country. It could save some of our small employers a lot of money. There are still plenty of consumer protections built in, and hopefully the money saved ends up being put into Minnesota's economy, either through higher wages or hiring more people. So on balance, I think it's a good approach, but Representative Loeffler, I certainly am concerned about the same things that you are. I just think on balance it makes sense to vote for this bill, and Representative Loonan, I appreciate you bringing it. I expect to vote green.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Loonan yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you. Representative Loonan, the first thing I want to ask you is whether this bill, if it has to do with health and improving the health of employees and so on, did it go to the Health and Human Services Reform Committee?
Representative Loonan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It did not go to the Health and Human Services Committee. This bill is affected by healthy living and proactive programs that employers put in. It does not pertain to it directly, it pertains to it indirectly. What this does is, and Representative Loeffler made my point, is it extends the same benefits to small job makers as is extended to large companies, which should be something that both sides of the aisle can embrace. There's something in this bill for everyone. Again, I encourage a green vote.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Loonan yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Loonan, I understand that the Deputy Commissioner of Commerce testified against your bill in committee, and I wonder if you could explain to the body why the Department of Commerce is opposed to your bill.
Representative Loonan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we testified in Commerce on this, in the Commerce Department or Commerce Committee on this, the Commerce Department did send a spokesman in, and their concern is that if we allow companies that are doing the right things with their employers to reap the benefits of those resources they put into those health programs, what that's going to do is it's going to leave a pool with a higher percentage of employers that aren't doing the right thing. I concur. And that by allowing those people to move over and take advantage of the resources they're putting into health improvement, it will put more and more pressure on more and more employees to put in those very programs that everyone in this room senses is effective.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Loonan and members, I think you have to, I know most of us don't know a lot about insurance, and I'm not any insurance expert, but first of all, I think it's worth noting that Representative Loonan's argument about how this is going to improve people's health, first, he says when he's arguing for his bill that this is all about improving the health of employees, and yet then he answers my question about why it didn't get vetted in the Health Committee by saying it's just an indirect kind of thing, and I think that's worth noting. Secondly, when we think about why certain employers pay certain health costs, it's not only about whether they help their employees go to a fitness club or something like that. It has to do with health and the cost of insurance and risk has to do with lots of other factors, having to do with age, having to do with disability, having to do with chronic diseases, and certainly taking care of yourself is a big piece of this. But there are lots of other factors. And what concerns me is exactly what he's expressing that the Department of Commerce expressed. When you take healthy people out of the insurance pool, you're leaving sicker people behind. And so insurance is spreading risk across lots of different people. And when you take the healthier people out, you're raising costs for everybody who's left. And so that's a concern that I have. And I think it would be a very concerning thing to pass this bill. Actually, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask Representative Mack to yield.
She will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Mack, I don't know if you've been paying close attention to this. I know it's just a little bit out of our wheelhouse, I guess, but I wonder if you, having heard Representative Loonan talk about how this is going to increase health of employees and so on, whether you think that this bill should have perhaps come to Health and Human Services reform.
Representative Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. Appreciate the question. Members, the core of this bill really does deal with insurance policy and what that means for the people of the state and how insurance companies operate, and that's up to the Department of Commerce, which is why this bill was dealt with in that committee. And so while there are obviously reciprocal effects of insurance, it's not key to some of the things that we talk about in our committee, what's at the heart of this bill, and that's insurance policy and how that's regulated. And so I think it's gone in the right direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Liebling.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Mack. So members, this bill really isn't about health as such. It's really about insurance. It's about spreading the risk across a larger pool or allowing people with healthier groups to opt out and leave everybody else holding the bag. And I think it's very concerning for us to tinker with this when the Department of Commerce, which are the experts on this, are opposed. And so I'm going to urge members to vote no on this bill.
The member from Scott, Representative Loonan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Again, I urge a green vote on this. What this provision will do is will make it more viable for small employers to create an environment where the parents of little Johnny can go to a health club, work out, become more productive. The data actually indicates that it's more effective if the activity occurs during the workday. But what this does is this awards the natural benefits for resources put in regarding health care. The future of health care, members, is health. I urge a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 91 ayes and 38 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is House File 1127. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1127, number 4 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to financial institutions.
I recognize the bill author, the member from Hennepin, Representative Loon, to introduce your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this bill is what's known as the Savings Promotion Raffle, or more commonly referred to as prize-linked savings. It simply would allow both banks and credit unions to offer accounts where if members or individuals that have those savings accounts, for every time they make a deposit into that account, they can be entered into a drawing to win a prize, either a item or more money to put in their savings account. It's a great way to entice people and encourage them to save, and there is absolutely no downside. Unlike gambling where there is a loss, this is something where everybody wins, so I would urge members to support it.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very briefly, I would urge members to support it as well. Unlike the last bill, where I understand that there were some concerns from a consumer protection standpoint, we've heard about no concerns relative to consumers. The gaming folks, everybody is on board and has testified in favor of Representative Loonan. It's a good bill, and I'd urge a green vote.
Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Oh, sorry. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 1127.
Third reading. Any further discussion on the bill? Representative Loon.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I didn't get to make my nice speech. Members, not to belabor, but just this really is a great way to promote savings, and it's great that both our banks and our credit unions can participate. I've got a lot of great facts and figures, if you'd like, on our savings rate, but in our country and things that are going on. But basically, a lot of people in our country do not save for the eventual rainy day that comes in life, and as many as 48% of people in the United States couldn't cover an emergency expenditure of $400. They would have to go and borrow from family and friends or sell assets to cover that. So we want to really encourage people to save. This is a great way to do it, and again, I would ask for your support.
Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 125 ayes and 2 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is House File 303. Representative Erickson, for what purpose do you rise? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to a point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm rising to pay tribute and to remember an employee who has worked here on this Capitol campus for nearly 30 years. This morning, we learned of the death of Lynn Thomas, who has worked in Senate Council for 28 years. And I would like us to remember her at this time. She joined the Senate on January 5th, 1987. She worked, as you know, as the legislative assistant for the Office of Nonpartisan Senate Counsel Research and Fiscal Analysis. She was a graduate of the University of North Dakota and worked at the Bismarck Tribune following her graduation. She's preceded in death by her mother and one brother, and is survived by her father, two brothers, and a significant other. I always enjoyed seeing her in the tunnel as she walked daily. She was a physically fit woman and has been a great asset to what we do here on Capitol Hill. And so, members, I'd like you to rise to remember Lynn M. Thomas.
Please rise for a moment of silence. Members, the next bill on the calendar for today is House File 303. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 303, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government.
I recognize the bill author, the member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd like to start off, so that I don't forget, by thanking the staff, the fine staff that helped to put this together. Nonpartisan, Mary Mullen, Janelle Taylor, Brad Hagemeyer, John Walls, Simon Wenzel, and Sam Moyer. And partisan staff, Gavin Hansen, the committee administrator, Leah Patton, committee legislative assistant, Abby Loesch, Republican research consultant, and Nancy Connolly, DFL research consultant. And having said that and thank the staff, I'd like to talk about the bill a little bit. You know, it's not easy putting something like this together, and we've been using song titles to kind of set the stage. You know, Representative Davids has had a history of that, and a lot of song lyrics thrown around yesterday. So I got to thinking, you know, when I got this assignment to put this together, you know, what songs are going through my head? Take This Job and Shove It. Friends in Low Places. But then I got thinking some more as we began working on this, and you know, Mr. Roberts, It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood came to mind. I thought Our Cup Runneth Over. I mean, that seemed really good for a while. Today I'm pretty much into Beatles mode, Help. So with that, I'd like to thank some more people. It was a pleasure working with Representative Kahn and the other members of the DFL side of the ledger, and certainly my Republican colleagues as well, my Vice Chair, Representative Heinzman, of course Representative Green, who tried to work to make a good bill better. So with that, I would like to present a bill that we are constitutionally required to do, and that the people of Minnesota expect us to do. A brief explanation, this I believe is the 7th year of legacy funding, and as the amounts of money rise, expectations rise as well. we are supposed to enhance, preserve, and protect. That's the goal that everyone agrees to. The how to achieve that goal is where we have our differences at times. Now, when I introduced this bill in committee, and earlier there were a few comments I made, I'm going to shorten these up today, but one of the things that I've noticed over time is as the amounts increase, expectations increase, and with some groups you get this sense of entitlement working its way in. And I urge in the future and in this bill that those who accept or are awarded money under this fund avoid the feelings of entitlement. The baseline for legacy is 0. There's no such thing as a cut in legacy money because it's a 0 baseline. And so with that, I will add that there were things like in this bill that I'll say what's not there. There's nothing in here that gives $45,000 to an author. There's nothing, there are no puppet shows in this bill. This bill is fair, it's transparent. Accountability procedures were added by Representative Green. If you don't fulfill if you receive money and don't fulfill the stipulations of the funding, there's no future funding. It included more stipulations on the usage of money, roughly 90% of which goes to Greater Minnesota. And that might seem out of line, except when you realize that 90% of the projects, 90% of the habitat is in Greater Minnesota. The money is not static. Amounts change and recipients change. Now, once again, we have 4 funds that receive money dedicated by the Constitution. We do an annual appropriation to the outdoor heritage. This year, they receive 33% of the money, $99,993,000. The other 3 funds are biennial. Clean water, 33% of the money, $226,202,000. Parks and trails, 14.25%, $89,350,000. Arts and cultural heritage, 19.75%, $124,215,000. So that's how the money is divided up. And now we can talk a little bit more today about how it was divided up. And working on this with me, Representative McNamara, dealing with Lessard Sams. He's not officially a member of the committee, but his insight with Lessard Sams is invaluable. He will explain that portion of the bill. And Representative Torkelson, a Legacy Committee member who serves on the Clean Water Council, will discuss with you the clean water portion of the bill. So with that, I would yield to Representative McNamara.
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Urdahl, thank you for the opportunity to explain the Lessard Sams Outdoor Heritage Council part of the bill. And it's been an honor in my time serving on the Lessard Sams Council to have served with Representative Lilly, with Representative Hansen, and now with Representative Dill. It's truly an honor to both be appointed. I've got to think, Mr. Speaker, I've been appointed by you, by Speaker Thiessen, and by Speaker Zeller. So it's been a real honor to be on that commission. And where many will say, have different likes or dislikes in state government, I've often said this is some of the most enjoyable things to be involved in, and I really think we can speak proudly of where a lot of this money is going. I'm just going to highlight a few things. In the prairies, there's almost $41 million being allocated for prairies. Prairie bank easements, acquisitions are some of the things, WMAs, SNAs, Minnesota buffers for wildlife and water. a great one that we partner with clean water money on to do really good things to keep our moving water clean with getting natural buffers on along the edges of them. Prairie chicken habitat restoration work. Prairie chickens are native to Minnesota, and unfortunately their habitat has been greatly reduced, and got a terrific project on that. The Camp Ripley partnership, Representative Creech's district up there, where we're creating a larger buffer around the federal Camp Ripley with natural wildlife and such. It's a great program. The program at Cass Lake, the Protect Forest Lands initiative up in Representative Purcell, Representative Van Zelk's area up there, good project. Cass Lake stands out as being one of the best county forest managed counties in our state, and so we're glad to partner with them. Critical shoreline habitat protection, another phase 3 project, a good one. They're all part of the forest region, which has almost $13 million in it. And again, as Representative Urdahl talked about, this is all out of the outdoor heritage, the Lessard Sam's portion, which we do annually. As Representative Urdahl mentioned, the other parts of the proposal are done just once every 2 years like our budget. But Lessard Sam's, we will be back again next year with an annual Lessard Sam's bill before the floor here. Then we have wetlands. We have about $22 million of wetlands. Some of the things I'd like to mention, the wild rice, shoreland protection. Representative Purcell has often talked about that. There's some wildlife protection in there. And then one I really like, the accelerating the waterfall production area and the living shallow lakes and wetlands initiative, where we make these shallow lakes more productive for wetlands and for game birds. A great one. Lake Bemidji, boy, Representative Purcell, you're in here a lot. Lake Bemidji South Shore, that restoration project where we had that old lumber operation down there. We're working on cleaning that up to help the city of Bemidji. Shell Rock, down in Representative Benton's district, a good project down there is in here. And then Lake Nokomis, Representative Kahn, that's one I know you've been intricately involved in. As a matter of fact, it's called the Integrate Habitat Enhancement, coincidentally. And then the Conservation Partners Legacy Grant Program. Members, this is a neat one that's $8.5 million, and that's where we partner with local Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, maybe a local gun club or a local conservation group does some work, and we have a small grant that they partner with to do some work right on the ground. So it's a competitive grant process. That's a good thing. And then I think it's important to note that the administration on this part of the bill is actually just about 1%. That's all it is. They run a very efficient operation. Lessard Sam's has a total of 4 employees, even though they grant out $100 million a year. So Representative Urdahl, thank you for the opportunity to explain Lessard Sam's. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for letting me serve on it. And Representative Urdahl, I'll turn it back to you.
Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative McNamara. I yield to Representative Torkelson.
The member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Urdahl, and thank you, members. The clean water portion of the bill is about 1/3 of the spending. This year's appropriation is $226,202,000 spent on a variety of clean water projects. Most of this funding flows through our state agencies, including the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the Public Facilities Authority, the Pollution Control Agency, the Department of Natural Resources, Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, and the Minnesota Department of Health, along with the Metropolitan Council. As far as the amount of money going to those various agencies, and I would remind you that this is a 2-year appropriation. The Department of Agriculture gets Department of Agriculture gets $5,834,000, PFA $9,250,000, Pollution Control Agency $26,250,000, Department of Natural Resources $8,500,000, Bowser $58 million, $131,000, Department of Health $4,013,000, and the Met Council $1,225,000. These funds are spent on a variety of water projects, and I will just highlight the areas that they're spent on. $7.8 million, or 3.5%, is to provide technical expertise, tools in conducting applied research. $23.5 million, or 11%, is spent developing watershed restoration and protection strategies. $24.1 million, or 11%, is spent monitoring and assessing surface waters. There is a provision in the Constitution that a percentage of this money be spent on groundwater. I believe the provision in the Constitution is 5%, but we are far exceeding that by spending 14%, or $31.2 million, on drinking water and groundwater protection efforts. And finally, the on-the-ground projects, the projects that really do make a difference on the landscape. We are spending $135 million, or 61% of this year's allocation. Members, I look forward to your questions and amendments.
Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple more categories. And first, I neglected to give the total at the beginning. It's about, for the biennium, close to $644 million that we will be sending back to the people of Minnesota. The parks and trails, fortunately this time, we didn't have the big debate that I had the last time I chaired this committee over the percentages regarding the DNR metro parks in greater Minnesota. An agreement was reached 4 years ago. They have been meeting since then and establishing a structure for greater Minnesota's parks and their commission. And so the 40% DNR, 40% metro, and the 20% greater Minnesota remains in this bill. And in meetings with those three groups, everyone seems to be satisfied how everything is moving along. Under the arts and culture heritage, the major two expenditures there are to the State Arts Board and the Minnesota Historical Society, and through them a lot of funding goes across the entire state of Minnesota. The Historical Society last biennium did 1,500 projects in 87 counties. The Humanities Center also receiving funding. They do valuable things. One that they and I are very proud of is Veterans Voices. We also have included some funding in here for the Somali youth group Kajuk. And with that, I guess I have concluded my run-through of the bill.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Khan moves to amend House File Number 303, the third engrossment. And the amendment is coded A33.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan, to explain your amendment.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Speaker, this is a very simple amendment that I'm not quite even sure why we had to add at this point. The board has in the last bill, this exact language appeared in the last bill, and it was apparently very successful. It is not an increased appropriation. This is exactly the language that was in last year's bill. It just takes a certain amount of this rather large appropriation and says that it will be contracted with the Conservation Corps Minnesota. Now, I don't know if you people have looked at the Conservation Corps Minnesota and what it does in your district, but it's an incredible group that has used low-income and disadvantaged kids to get them into these working groups to teach them working good working habits and working well for in the outdoors. Kids who have often had no connection with the outdoors. We heard no complaints of how it was used last year. There are other places in the bill where they also use Conservation Corps to work on projects. The head of the Conservation Corps says having this detailed language number in it is very helpful for their planning purpose and for recruiting kids to do it. And if ever any of you haven't done it, I really urge you to go look at projects that they're working on in your area or in the state. So I would urge a yes vote on the amendment.
Discussion to the Khan amendment. The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this amendment does allow for flexibility. And Representative Khan has convinced me, and I would accept this.
Any further discussion to the Khan amendment? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the A33 Khan amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Khan moves to amend House File Number 303, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A34.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan, to explain your amendment.
Mr. Speaker, what this amendment does is we have the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission submitting a list of projects ranked in priority order. This is exactly what DNR does. It's exactly what the Metropolitan Council does with all of that, so we can see it. When I first said, why haven't they done it, and I drew up this amendment, I said, wait a minute, it's already state law. Well, since somehow we managed to draw up a bill that did not use the state law, I think it's time that we add this additional language to the bill.
Discussion to the amendment. The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission is all right with this. Representative Khan raises good points, and I would accept this.
Further discussion. The member from St. Louis, Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Khan. I worked on this legislation in, I guess, the previous session, and I am okay with that as well, and think it's a good suggestion for the board.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Khan A34 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Khan moves to amend House File 303, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A35.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan, to explain your amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, this is again clarifying that we do expect to see these criteria in detail. This is modeled after, and again, Representative Metza knows because he worked on this. This was modeled after the very successful model we look for with the Metropolitan Council so that we have some idea of what's happening. So I urge a yes vote.
And there is an amendment to your amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Khan is moving to her amendment to House File 303, the third engrossment, as amended, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A46.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan, to your amendment to your amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to say a few words to this amendment, to the amendment. I don't know if any of you have tried to use the maps that have been being produced, but they're quite difficult. We really need much more connectivity. We need a much better way of presenting them to the public. We've started to do this in the last bill. This kind of just continues the process, and I would hope that people could accept this amendment.
The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Khan, we had a good streak going, but in this one, I did have members, as I said, from the DNR, Greater Minnesota the Parks and Trails Commission, and the Metro Parks come into my office, talk to me about this, say that they wanted a clean bill, meaning they didn't want any unwanted amendments to it, and they specifically said that they did not want this one. So at this point, although I would be open to more discussion next year, I would oppose this.
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to a point of order under House Rules 3.21, paragraph B as in boy, and I'm prepared to offer advice when you're ready.
Representative McNamara rises to a point of order under Rule 3.21 in the House Rules. Representative McNamara, state your advice.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. This amendment is not germane to the underlying amendment. It introduces a new subject, and I would ask you to take my advice. Well taken.
Representative Khan.
Well, Mr. Speaker, following the lead of my chair, Representative Urdahl, and we've been doing so well so far, I think I'll withdraw this amendment at this point.
Representative Khan withdraws the A46 amendment to her A35 amendment. Members, we're back on the A35 amendment. Discussion to the A35 Khan amendment. The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And back in the throes of harmony, I would support this.
Any further discussion on the A35 amendment? The member from St. Louis, Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Urdahl, we love harmony. Vote yes on this one.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the A35 Khan amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Khan moves to amend House File Number 303, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A36.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan, to explain your amendment.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, there's a little history behind this amendment. I know it's pretty simple, but this is one where I submitted it with all the people who co-signed the amendment because they did such a good job on co-signing it. And partially what inspired this, you know, and I'm not sure I should be using his name when he sits so close to me, but Representative Davids in the Ways and Means Committee said something very, very positive about how much he liked spraying butterflies and things like that. The next day he came to me and he said, I didn't realize there were so many people who like butterflies in the state. So for the people who like butterflies in the state, this is a Khan, Davids, Urdahl, Murphy, and others amendment. We practically have the whole back row on it. So I urge a vote on this, positive vote on this amendment.
And I applaud your bipartisanship. There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Poppy moves to amend the Khan amendment to House File 303, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A48.
The member from Mauer, Representative Poppy, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I appreciate that there is a back row that appreciates monarch butterflies and would like to have habitat for monarch butterflies. I am hoping to amend this amendment with one word. So in the last line, instead of using the word avoiding the use of pesticides, that we would minimize, and so it would be minimizing the use of pesticides. This is really just something that we want to make sure we all agree that pollinator habitat is important. Pollinator habitat is important to crop production. It's important to all of us. It's important for the food that we eat. So we are concerned about making sure that we have monarch butterfly habitat, that we have other bee habitat, pollinator habitat. But in this case, I think we're trying to just make it clear that it's not necessarily, not all pesticides are necessarily all bad, but there is some agreement that maybe there's some concern with pesticides, there's concern with weather, there's concern with other things with regards to pollinators. So I would ask for your support. I think this is could be seen as a friendly amendment actually to this amendment. So I'd appreciate your support.
Discussion on the Poppy A48 amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think that this amendment is necessary. We could get into a long linguistic discussion about avoiding, minimizing, comparing them to a much stronger word like eliminating. I could do it in French if you'd rather have it in French too, as we go through it. I don't think that the Poppy amendment is necessary. I don't think it's helpful. We're looking at a very small amount of lands. We're looking at, these are just the legacy funds. It's not like every farmer's field everywhere, but in the interests of moving on and not having an extended discussion on this, I'll accept this amendment at this point and we'll continue to work on the issue.
The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too would urge a green vote on the Poppy amendment.
Any further discussion on the Poppy amendment? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the A48 Poppy amendment to the Kahn amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment to the amendment is adopted. We are now back on the Kahn A36 amendment as amended. The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as one who has seen Representative Davids float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, I urge a green vote on this.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Kahn A36 amendment as amended signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment as amended is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend House File Number 303, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A41.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members. I would encourage folks to go to page 63. This is a provision relating to the Clean Water Council. And we talked about this a little earlier during the session when some of these bills moved back and forth regarding to boards and commissions. What happened here is that the majority has taken the Board of Regents and the Metropolitan Council representatives off the Clean Water Council as voting members. So they can still stay there as non-voting members. But I would encourage people to look at page 63 and you will see who is on the Clean Water Council if the bill passed as it was. 2 members representing farm organizations, 2 members representing business organizations, 2 members representing environmental organizations, 1 member representing SWCDs, 1 member representing watershed districts, a nonprofit relating to lakes, 2 members representing city governments, county governments, township offices, tribal organizations, hunting organizations, and fishing organizations. So every voting member left, if the bill passes as it is representing a special interest. Every member left would be there representing their interest, and you're taking the Board of Regents off as voting members, the people who would have the scientific background. So my amendment is simple. It deletes that section, making the change, and we go back to the status quo where the University of Minnesota still has a representative on the board, on the council, and they can be there as a voting member providing the science that's needed when we make these tough water quality decisions. I ask for your support.
Discussion to the Hansen A41 amendment. The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would yield to our Clean Water Council member on the committee, Representative Torkelson.
The member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there are some very good reasons for these changes. First and number one, both of these organizations, the University of Minnesota and the Metropolitan Council, have received direct appropriations from the Clean Water Council recommendations. So there's certainly the potential for conflict of interest because they are direct recipients of funding proposals. Second, over the time that this council has existed, there's kind of been a parallel organization that has grown up. It's the interagency organization. So that includes DNR, Bowser, PCA, and the other state agencies, but it also includes the University of Minnesota and the Met Council. So they sit really on both sides of this procedure. What's happened over time also is that the recommendations coming from the agency group has gone directly to the governor, and he has chosen, at least this year, to go with their recommendations, opposing some of the recommendations of the council. So there's, in my mind, these folks, the university and the Met Council, are really getting two bites at the apple. It doesn't seem appropriate to me. And finally, Mr. Speaker, this just is the best path forward, so I would urge a red vote on Representative Hansen's amendment.
Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would support Representative Torkelson's view on this and also urge a red vote.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I am the House's other representative on the Clean Water Council, and I would urge a green vote. I echo Representative Hansen's concern that the University of Minnesota representative on the council provides part of the science background on the council. As to the conflict of interest, the members of the council quite regularly are asked to declare whether or not they have a conflict of interest, and the rules about that would apply to any particular considerations. The interagency organization that was mentioned is, although they can make recommendations to the governor and the governor can put things in his budget, this is about the Clean Water Council's recommendations about this legacy money that we're talking about today. It's not about the governor's budget. And we need to have those voices. The University of Minnesota representative there is quite a valuable voice very frequently on a lot of the issues that we discuss. So I would urge you to keep the structure the way it is now and vote green.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker, will Representative Torkelson yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Kahn.
Representative Torkelson, as I read through the list of the people you're letting stay on as voting members, it seems that very many of them would represent districts that would get direct appropriations. It seems as if you're just picking on two while letting all the other ones do this instead of doing a general conflict of interest issue. And the second part of my question is, since you seem, I just wonder if you're trying to support all of the recommendations that have come from the Clean Water Council, and while you're chastising the governor for interfering with them, is there any case that you've tried to interfere with them?
The member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Kahn. Well, first off, those other organizations do not receive direct appropriations. They do, in some cases, receive appropriations via other state agencies that do distribute these funds, but they do not get direct appropriations. So there is a difference between the two that are going to non-voting and the others. And secondly, Representative Kahn, I've forgotten your second question. Could you remind me?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Second question, did you move forward with total recommendations and totally, as it went through the process, totally support everything that the Clean Water Council requested?
He will yield. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Kahn. Darn near. I came very close, but there is one specific appropriation for the Ag Water Quality Certification Program where I did recommend less funding because there are some serious questions about the situation with that program. It has some very good aspects to it, but it also has some things that I'm trying to get answers on and haven't gotten as much information as I would like. So I think it's important that we take this position with a little bit lower number into the conference committee work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Torkelson yield for a couple questions?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, did the University of Minnesota or Board of Regents or staff, or did anybody ask to be moved from voting to a non-voting member?
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, no. In fact, I received a letter from Dr. Schwackhammer, who currently is the University of Minnesota representative on the board. She did not like my idea. She is leaving the board, as a matter of fact. I don't think her replacement has been named, but will be named sometime soon. And in fact, you mentioned earlier about the science aspect of this. Now, while Dr. Schwackhammer certainly is a well-qualified scientist who has brought great input to the board, there's no guarantee that the university representative on the council be a scientist. And in fact, the council brings in a variety of scientists that present to the council on a regular basis. This council meets once a month for about 5 hours each meeting, and they do bring in all sorts of information from all sorts of sources, including a variety of scientists. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Torkelson, did anyone from the Met Council ask to be moved from voting to a non-voting member?
He will yield. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They did not ask to be moved from one category to the other.
Representative Hansen.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Representative Torkelson would yield again.
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
And Representative Torkelson, did anybody else who would be remaining, so any of these groups from these other organizations, did they ask to make changes where the Board of Regents and the Met Council would move from a voting to a non-voting member?
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, I've had various conversations, none of which I can offer you any details on, but there has been a conversation that perhaps the role of these two agencies is not working as well as it should because of what I described earlier regarding their dual nature of getting 2 bites at the apple instead of just one.
Representative Hansen.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I think I heard in those exchanges Representative Torkelson refer to this as his idea to move to make this change. So it appears there's been communication from the current voting member of the University of Minnesota, who's not going to be on there anymore anyway, doesn't have an interest, who's concerned about this. Doesn't appear that the Met Council asked for this. Maybe there was a conversation with some other of the groups or organizations or individuals representing those organizations, but this doesn't appear to be a change that has an outcome to encourage the scientific decision making when we're relating to spending $100 million a year, $100 million a year and growing on water quality programs. So I'd encourage a green vote on the amendment.
Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker, I still don't think I've gotten a correct answer for Representative Torkelson. When you look at all the groups that he allows to be voting members and who they represent, Remember, at some point that means an individual, even though they're representing a group, goes on. That individual is very likely a member of one of those groups. And lots of those groups are getting appropriations through the legacy bill. So he cuts out just 2 that he says have a conflict of interest because they're getting appropriations through the bill, and leaves 5 others who could easily, the representative could easily be someone whose group is getting an appropriation from the bill. And aside from trusting their requirements on disclosure and non-voting when there's a conflict and so forth, his proposal, which is written in the bill, is self-contradictory according to his reasoning.
Any further discussion? Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Torkelson yield to some questions?
He will yield. Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, did the metro area counties express a desire to remove these voting members?
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can assure you this is my initiative. I'm not acting at the behest of anyone, any organization. I have looked at the structure of the Clean Water Council, with which I am very familiar. I've been on the Clean Water Council since before the Legacy Act passed. I've observed the procedures of the Clean Water Council for a long time. I know how it works. I am not a voting member myself, and neither are you, Representative. And I think these ideas and things are appropriate to make the council work better, smoother, and more transparently. I've given my reasons for doing this. I think they are appropriate, and I would urge a green vote.
Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Torkelson yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, can you point to an instance or instances in which you found the vote of the member representing the University of Minnesota problematic from the point of view of a conflict of interest?
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are no such incidents. As you know, Representative Urdahl, that there are very, very few votes where there is any division of the vote. I don't remember a close vote for the council yet. These folks will still have a seat at the table. They will have full participation in all discussions held at the council. It's just appropriate in my mind that they not have 2 bites of the apple. And I had a little Thiessen moment there. I meant to say red vote.
Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the other groups that are represented, just for folks' knowledge here, the soil and water conservation districts are represented, although they don't get direct appropriations. They receive a rather large chunk indirectly of the kind of money that is spent by the Clean Water Council. The watershed districts, similarly, are represented on the Clean Water Council as voting member. Similarly, they also spend quite a lot of the money. Township officials are represented, city governments, business organization, statewide farm organization, another business organization, another statewide farm organization, rural counties, an environmental organization, and another environmental organization, the metropolitan area counties, a statewide hunting organization, the Met Council, another city government representative, the state higher education system, that'd be the U of M, and statewide fishing organizations. So there's a mix, and then we've got our non-voting members like Representative Torkelson and myself, and people who sit in from the agencies, and a couple of senators, and so on. So there's a wide range of different types of positions. It's meant to represent the wide range of stakeholders. Quite a number of them represent organizations that in one way or another receive or use appropriations that come through the work of the Clean Water Council. Neither the University of Minnesota nor the Met Council holds one of those kind of doubled up positions where you've got more than one representative. We've got more than one representative for cities, more than one representative for counties, more than one representative for business organizations, more than one representative for environmental organizations, and more than one representative for sportsmen. It's two voices at the table that bring a different perspective. We are not able to point to any particular problem, issue, difficulty, conflict of interest, or whatsoever that's been happening on the Clean Water Council as a result of these people being there to vote. We have nothing but Representative Torkelson's idea that this is what should happen. So for some reason, Representative Torkelson wants to remove these people from the voting members of the council. He's saying it's because they get 2 chunks of the pie, but that's true of many of these organizations. Many of these organizations do not receive all of their money from through the Clean Water Council and through the Legacy Act. The watershed district, certainly not. The soil water conservation district, certainly not. Even the hunting and fishing organizations that are represented here get money out of the other legacy committees. So we're not able to point to any particular reason why these 2 groups would be singled out. There seems to be some reason Representative Torkelson wants to single them out and take them off. We haven't really heard exactly what that is, because the idea of the appropriations is really not the reason, because other people are in the same situation on this council. So please vote green.
Further discussion on the Hansen amendment. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the A41 amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend House File Number 303, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A42.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the A42 amendment, we actually in committee listened and listened to a little bit of the debate just happened here, and there was a reference to the Ag Water Quality Certification Program. What this amendment does is it takes some of the money that's being used for studies and BMP development and IT work and puts it in the Ag Water Quality Certification Program, which is real projects on the ground for real farmers. I've listened, in debates before where we talk about who we're spending too much money on things that are not projects on the ground. And here we have a project, a successful project that is working as a pilot project. And we just heard Representative Torkelson express concern about the project not being ready for statewide. Well, we say that it should be expanded into priority watersheds but not go statewide. Now, there was a press conference a few months ago where it was announced there was a $9 million federal grant that was coming in that could make this program even better, affect more farmers, work in a collaborative basis. On their desk you will find a letter from USDA dated April 20th that references the program, and the key is that the full proposal, the full $5 million is needed. My amendment, which by the way I'm going to ask for roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We provide full funding, that $5 million that brings in $9 million to implement these practices in the nation-leading water quality certification program. It gives the chance to double down working with folks and getting more practices implemented. We've had testimony in committees. We had testimony at the press conferences from a variety of farmers, large and small, around the state who have been implementing the practices. Representative Torkelson just answered to Representative Kahn that this was the area where he actually made a change. Well, the change he made was to cut the council recommendations, going from $3 million down to $500,000 a year, a total of $1 million. We provide the full funding needed, taking it from BMP development, IT work, and analysis to actual real projects, and that gets us the $9 million we need to make this project work even better. So I'd encourage a green vote.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend his amendment to House File Number 303, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded RA 15-034.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hold on. Keep them up, guys. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment to the amendment is similar to what we passed in an amendment Representative Schultz passed earlier, and actually was adopted in the Environment Committee. So the discussion about germaneness earlier, here's an amendment that was heard in committee, adopted in one committee, taken out in another committee, and we're asking for it to be put back in. And I want to be clear, because there's some confusion, I think, about this. This is session law, not statute, so it's relating to land acquired in this appropriation, in these appropriations, not putting it into statute, cannot be treated with pollinator lethal insecticides. So it is not private lands, not individual farmers, but public lands purchased with these dollars could not use that type of insecticide, which has an impact on pollinators. Language in the Outdoor Heritage Bill says that we protect fish, game, and wildlife. Pollinators are wildlife, so it's constitutional, and I would encourage your support.
Discussion on the Hansen amendment to his amendment coded RA 15-034. The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to clarify a couple of issues here. Would Representative Hansen yield for a couple of questions?
He will yield. Representative Urdahl.
Representative Hansen, just to be clear, does this provision exist anywhere in Minnesota statute at the present time?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Urdahl, the definition of pollinator lethal insecticide exists in statute. However, the prohibition on land acquired in fee does not. This specific amendment had been added to the outdoor heritage component in Representative McNamara's committee, and it was removed in your committee, and here we're trying to put it back.
Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hansen, is in these types of lands, I've been informed that any pesticide is very minuscule. Is this a common practice? Is this being done a lot?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to, Representative Urdahl, just follow up to something mentioned earlier. 2 years ago in 2013, we provided that we should have pollinator-friendly habitat with our public dollars. So that's current law, that's in statute. It did not relate to insecticides or pesticides. Pesticides being the generic term, insecticides are part of pesticides. The use that we're talking about here when there's an acquisition, and it could be a wetland acquisition or it could be a prairie acquisition, it would be relatively minuscule use. There are some areas where corn is planted for food plots on wildlife management areas, where there could be pollinator lethal insecticides applied with the seed treatment. I just sent out to all members at the beginning of the debate a recent scientific study from Nature magazine, peer-reviewed study about the lethality of those specific neonicotinoid pesticides. But I want to go back to a common use is Roundup or glyphosate, which may be used for what's called burning down the field so that there can be a new planting. It's my understanding that the glyphosate products do not have the bee box. They do not have that warning label on the label for them killing or affecting bees. So that would not apply. What we're talking about here are those pesticides, insecticides, as part of pesticides that would be affecting. Neonicotinoids are one of those.
Representative Urdahl.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Representative Hansen. I would yield to Representative Torkelson.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to a point of order under House Rule 3.21, paragraph B, and I'm prepared to offer advice.
Representative Torkelson rises to a point of order under House Rule 3.21. State your advice, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this amendment is not germane to the underlying amendment, introduces new subject matter to the underlying amendment. Mr. Speaker, I urge a green vote on the point of order. Or I urge you to do it right.
Members, after reviewing the amendment to the amendment, and the rule, I find the point of order well taken. Just as a reminder to members on the amendments, just as our amendments must be germane to the bill, amendments are only to change things that are actually in the bill. The amendments to amendments really can need to only pertain to things that are in the underlying amendment that they're trying to amend. So just to help you as you draft your amendments, we certainly want to make sure that we're doing that properly. So we are now back on the A42 amendment, the Hansen amendment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I kind of figured that might be what where you were going on this. But on the main amendment, that is a substantive amendment. And we're changing the dollars that are appropriated in the bill, making a change in priorities, putting it to actual projects, putting it to a program, a pilot program that has been working. Now, Representative Torkelson had indicated that he had concerns about the program and he hadn't gotten the answers he was looking for. Well, I think it may be that he's been getting the answers, he just doesn't like them. Ask the people who've been participating in the program whether they like the program. Ask the people who have been signing up whether it's working. Now, Representative Torkelson, you know I've had some concerns about it, so what I've done, instead of saying go statewide, it should be expanded in priority watersheds. Not starting it, not killing off the program at its beginning, giving it a chance to grow, seeing if it can impact water quality at a time when every day there are news stories about water quality issues in our state. So the Department of Ag took a risk. They took a risk of trying something new. And I've been skeptical about it, but I also want to give it time to work and I don't want to turn down the opportunity where we can make it work.
Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The Ag Water Quality Certification Program certainly has some great aspects to it. The participants, I agree with you, Representative Hansen, are well satisfied with the program and have taken some positive steps toward water quality. My problems are with the way the program is structured and planned. We've done 4 pilot programs. 3 of them worked, 1 of them didn't. I have yet to get a good report on what went wrong in the pilot program that didn't work. We've spent approximately $3 million on this program so far and signed up, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's about 40 participants. That's a lot of money per participant. Projected moving forward, we would add in another, if we went with the governor's proposal, $5 million in this 2-year period, another $5 million in the next 2-year period. That's another $10 million of state money, coupled with $9 million of federal money, and still not enough money to take this program statewide. If certification is a valuable thing, and I think it could be, it needs to be offered to all farmers. And there's really not an adequate plan in my mind that would generate the structure that would be able to take this program statewide. That's the sort of answers I'm waiting for, Representative Hansen. I've met many times with the Ag Department folks that are working on this. I would hope we can find some of those answers, get this program in better shape, and start moving it forward. But I'm not interested in overspending on something that only reaches a portion of our producers.
Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Just yesterday I was watching the news, and the Minnesota Pollution Control had a big report. I thought I could hold this up because I saw Chair Knobloch hold up Noble's report yesterday. And it shows southern Minnesota and a map, or a color picture of what's going on with our river, where the St. Croix River and the Mississippi meet. And take a look at it, because it's pretty clear what's going on. I don't want to get into the details, but there's, a lot of it comes in southern Minnesota. Half the lakes in southern Minnesota you can't swim in. You can't eat the fish. Around the whole state, much of it. So when we pass this legacy amendment, this is all gerane. Do you remember that little girl on the dock? I think that's what really helped pass it, was the little girl on the dock, and it says, we want clean water. I would argue that was, I'm a big believer in the arts, and Drazkowski and I are big on the trails. And anyways, I would argue that the water really is what pushed it over the top. I think we really need to go with the full $5 million on this to help fix this problem. Here's our chance. A couple years ago, I was put on the Environment Committee, and I didn't know a thing about RIM. So here's a program where we put $1 in, every dollar we put in, and we put millions in it. In the legacy, we're going to put money in it. In the environment bill, we're going to put money into the bonding bill. I think we put money into it. Why? Because we get $3 back. So here's your chance for you folks that care about such things. Of all the money we send to the feds and we don't get money back, here's your chance. You're going to get $1 back for the buck just about that you send out to the feds. So you got a chance. And the need is big. It's clear. I don't argue with Chair Torkelson at all whatsoever, and the number and the interest is big around the state. So like he said, if we were to do everybody that wants in, it's $700 million or more. But where I disagree with him is not to do it because that we can't do everybody. I think Representative Hansen probably is a little bit more on there with the opportunity to pick certain areas. We know where they are. We know where the problem areas are. We could focus in on that and target this money to those farms and help them, or the city where the problem is, and we could do it. I think about my son. He's in a doctoral program for chemistry at the U. So when he was a freshman, do you think he thought, well, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to quit because, you know, I can't do the whole thing. I got a lot of classes ahead of me. So is he better off to keep going and fighting and do it piece by piece by piece? At the end of the day, he's going to be successful, I hope. So that's kind of why, you know, I think we need to do this piecemeal. And please take a look at this report and think of that little girl on the dock, and that's what it is. I don't want to target where it's coming from or not. But I think as Minnesotans we can do better and have fish and water we can swim in, and water we can drink.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I first kind of woke up to this situation in the Environmental Committee when it came before us, and I realized that we were putting at risk $9 million from the federal government that is supporting this program. And first of all, let's remember why the federal government is giving us the $9 million, and that is because they recognize the quality of the program in Minnesota. They see it as a model program. And I hope you've all seen the letter that you received that recognizes that if we do not provide this $5 million, we can kiss that $9 million goodbye. Now, we've spent a couple of weeks here talking about finances and tight budgets and targets, and there's always a shortage of money, and I just find it ironic that we're willing to throw $9 million back to the federal government. My father, my deceased father, who very Norwegian, would suggest, well, maybe it's because the Swedish Americans have a different view on this than Norwegian Americans. And Norwegian, it's hard for us to send that money back. But that's on an attempt at a light note. But really, on a serious note, this program is working for those farmers who are involved. You know, you got to be patient. It's just started. I thought the Department of Ag and the committee made a very compelling case that they've started, they've got it going. And where they are working, it's working successfully. We heard in the Legislative Water Commission from a young couple who farm outside of Rothsay, who really wanted to show that, you know, wanted to demonstrate that they're doing the quality environmental work on their farm as producers and doing it right, and they had to make some adjustments, and they were really proud of that. They wanted to see how they stacked up. And in many ways, they're showing the rest of us how they stack up. They're giving us a demonstration project. They're certainly giving their neighbors a demonstration project. So let's remember the program's getting started. Let's also remember that this is really a farmer-focused effort. You know, if you've been reading the newspapers, you know there's a lot of talk about buffers. And I think our farmers have made a very strong case, and I listen very well to this case, that they need to be making decisions about their land. I buy into that, members, I really do. I think it's important, and that's the best way to do ag water quality, making progress with regard to agriculture and its impact on water. Farmers have to be involved. That's what this program does. The Ag Department works with the farmer to decide what can be the best techniques used on that farm, and the farmer is making decisions about what they're doing on their farm, and we support them through the certification program, through the funds, but also through an understanding that once they've made that good faith effort, and it's a tough effort they have to make, that they get some relief from changing requirements going into the future, the kind of surety that farmers want. This is only a 2-year-old program, recognized by the federal government as a model program, recommended by the council itself. I think we should maintain this funding. I encourage a green vote on the Hansen Amendment.
The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And while I appreciate Representative Johnson's comments on this, we are putting $226,202,000 into clean water. We are emphasizing our concern, our commitment to clean water in this bill, and I would follow the recommendations of one of the very few farmers that we actually have in the legislature on this matter, Representative Torkelson.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. And I really appreciate Representative Johnson getting up and making his comments. You know, we hear again and again that, you know, farmers are the best stewards of the land, and this is an opportunity, I think, for us to engage them in that and give them the opportunity to do that. You know, the Department of Agriculture has recently put together a blueprint for how we deal with nitrate issues in groundwater, and they've sampled 7,342 wells across 60 townships, 8 counties. The results so far in their testing is staggering. 13% of wells in these areas are exceeding the 10 parts per million drinking water standard. We need to do something about this, and I think this is an excellent way, as Clark Johnson was saying, to move this forward. It's too early to abandon this, and I think we need to have the full amount, and we need to continue with the federal dollars. So I urge that we support the Hansen amendment.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just to answer a couple of the questions, there are 260 farmers already working towards certification. The bill without the amendment only provides $1 million. The letter I provided to you shows that not making our commitment will put the $9 million of federal money at jeopardy. We've heard throughout the spring of the need to have choices and alternatives, and that one size doesn't fit all. And here's a program where one size does not fit all. Here's a program where people work together, individuals working together to see which practices, real on-the-ground practices, work in their situation. And then they implement them, and we give them some assistance on implementing them. So to make a decision to walk away from this program by not providing the funding it needs at the time when it's just getting going is a mistake. We can move forward with my amendment to fully fund it. Now, Representative Urdahl talked about clean water. Representative Lilly talked about the kid on the dock, little girl on the dock. We're taking the money from some IT programs, some BMP development, some other types of things that we are in the 7th year, folks, 7 to 25 years on clean water. And I think Minnesotans are going to want to see some results for making that choice in 2008. They're going to want to see some results rather than more BMP development. They're going to want some action, and here's a project that we can fund. You can make the right choice here, implementing practices, working with people, getting the job done. I'd ask for a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion on the A42 amendment, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 61 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Schultz moves to amend House File Number 303, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A43.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Schultz, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is the same amendment that I brought forward earlier this week and that most of you voted for. This amendment does not allow the use of pesticides lethal to pollinators on land acquired with legacy funds. And like I said before, it's very important that we protect our pollinators. Over 80% of our crops, plants, flowering plants are pollinated and need pollination, which is important for our food supply. The biggest environmental concern when Americans are polled after water are pollinators. So people care about this issue. Unfortunately, Representative Torkelson has amended this amendment, and in that amendment, they've drastically changed it to protect chemical companies, the companies that produce the pesticides that are lethal to pollinators, like neonicotinoids. And these corporations are outside the U.S., in countries like Germany and Switzerland. So again, this is another example of the majority in this House representing the interests of corporations over the interests of Minnesotans. So unfortunately, I'm going to withdraw this amendment because of Representative Torkelson's secondary amendment. Thank you.
Representative Schultz withdraws the A43 amendment. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Wagenius moves to amend House File Number 303, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded RA15-032.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think, folks, it's fair to say that when Minnesotans voted for the legacy bill, clean, safe drinking water was one of the primary reasons that they voted for it. And one of the ways you have clean, safe drinking water is to have wellhead protection areas. In other words, you don't want any kind of bad things to get into your well, so you have an area around it that makes sure that bad things don't get in the well. Wellhead protection areas. We have in this state, and identified by the Department of Health, almost 900,000 acres that are designated as wellhead protection areas. Unfortunately, we only have 1,200 acres that have permanent easements. So we have a lot of wells that aren't protected. So in this bill, there is money for Bowser that does 4 things that could protect wellheads. 2 are permanent and 2 are temporary. So because of the small amount of money, what this amendment does is say, let's concentrate that money on the things that are permanent and not on the things that are temporary. And I would ask for your support.
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Wellhead protection is an ongoing effort that's going on for a long time. I actually have a DWISMA on my own farm, a drinking water supply management area that is monitored, but it does not require any permanent removal of that land. I farm that land today, and there are, I think, 3 or 4 city wells that draw water for citizens of my home county, and I shouldn't say my home county, my farm county, and the entire Red Rock water system that delivers water across the region. If we do this amendment, we're taking money away from other important programs. There was no request from the agency for this additional funding. I would recommend a red vote.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then I would ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Wagenius.
If you look at the language in the bill, it says that the Department of Health and the local units of government should concentrate on those areas that are vulnerable. So they can rank these wellhead protection areas between those that are really should be protected and those that, okay, they're in the area, but they are not the vulnerable. We're not even close to protecting the vulnerable. So what I am trying to do here is to say safe, clean drinking water. That's what Minnesotans want. And let's concentrate our efforts on that. And I would appreciate a green vote.
Any further discussion on the Wagenius amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Khan moves to amend House File Number 303, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A31.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan, to explain your amendment.
Yes. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, this amendment restores the funding recommendations back to the projects and levels recommended by the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. This adheres to and preserves the Outdoor Heritage Council, and I certainly ask for your support. People who are here in the last session may remember the enormous flack I got for tampering with the recommendations of the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. In fact, my tampering was minimal compared to this. I didn't touch anything they had recommended funding for. I merely added funding for a couple of projects which I thought needed to be added from the bottom line. The House agreed with me, the conference committee agreed with me, the governor at one point agreed with me, and then faced with enormous pressure from other people, he ended up vetoing those two lines, and somehow in the next year we managed to pass them anyway. It's always a mystery how these things manage to happen. But this was part of the recommendations of the Outdoor Heritage Council, and for some reason it's been removed from the bill, and I would urge us to restore it at this time.
Discussion of the Khan amendment. The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Khan. This is an important issue, I know, to a lot of people in this chamber. And I want to relay that there's much concern that I've heard over essentially governmental units owning more land in the state of Minnesota. Concern about the loss of land from private ownership in the state of Minnesota. And much concern over the loss of tax revenue, even PILT payments in this state as land is acquired by governmental units. And so for that, today, I urge a red vote.
The member from Beltrami, Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like a roll call on this too, please.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I spoke to this when this was removed in committee, this project, and you know this is a real good project, and the White Earth nation brought this, and it was, as Representative Kahn has stated, this was a project that was approved all the way down the line and then was taken out in committee. And you know, this, I have a picture here, and I didn't make any to hand out, but the property, the land we're talking about is on the on the White Earth Reservation, and it's adjacent to the Wild Rice River and Lower Rice Lake. And this is a body of water that produces significant wild rice today. And back 30 years ago, 30-some years ago, there wasn't a stalk of rice in Lower Rice Lake, and that was because it was polluted out. And it was one of the first projects that I had to restore wild rice. And we were successful. We had to deal with agricultural runoff upstream that was putting so much chicken manure in there that some of you heard me talk about walking across water on scum algae. Well, that was what was going on here, and there was a lot of lily pads to support that scum algae. And so we had to deal with that, and we did, and we got rice, and that rice, that wild rice, is quite an economic benefit for the White Earth tribe, as well as something that I think most of you know they hold wild rice pretty dear. Part of their migration story. And wild rice is one of the best waterfowl habitats on planet Earth. And I see a few heads shaking, you betcha. If you're going to hunt ducks, find a rice bed and you're going to see ducks. It's also one of the best fishery habitats that we have in Minnesota. So protecting this is a primary objective of the White Earth Nation. And so I guess with that in mind, it's the same things that I said in committee, but I think it's worth repeating here on the floor. This is very important. I don't know any rationale for not including this. I haven't been provided any information of why it was taken out. We heard some things in committee, but I certainly didn't hear anything that was convincing. If it's taken into ownership for the tribe, it's going to be open to everybody to go hunt on that land. So it's not that isn't an issue that we're okay. If you're a white guy, you aren't going to be able to go hunt on that land. That's not accurate. You would be able to do that, and but it will protect it within that watershed so that we wouldn't have potentially have runoff that would put us back in the situation that we were 35, 40 years ago. So I rise in support of the Kahn amendment here, and you know, if we can get this onto the bill here today cleanly, I think this will be a good vote. If we can't get it on cleanly, then we'll have to rethink that. So I support the Kahn amendment as it is. Thank you.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the Kahn amendment. When this subject came forward, I was contacted by Clearwater County when I went up to one of their meetings, and they were never consulted. Clearwater County is a small county. It's a very poor county. They have 568,000 acres of land, and 200,000 of those acres are already publicly owned. So the amount of acreage that they're talking may not seem like a lot, but it's just a little more. And to the White Earth people, I'm a proud member of the White Earth Indian Reservation, and I too believe in clean water. But this land has been privately owned for years in the past, has not polluted the land, has not polluted the water, and I don't foresee that it's going to do that now. I also have a lot of family members on the White Earth Indian Reservation who are members and a lot of friends. And some of them own land in Clearwater County. I haven't heard, and in Monoman County and in Becker County, they're landowners just like everybody else. They're concerned about this. Since this subject came up months ago in committee, I haven't gotten one email from anybody, any member of the reservation in opposition to removing this. But I have gotten concerns from people all across the area that we are losing so much land in northern Minnesota, and they just keep taking more. And every year when the legacy bill passes again, thousands of acres more disappear. In committee, I asked Commissioner Landwehr, what's your goal? You know, what do you want? How much is enough? Do you have a goal? Do you know where the end is going to be? And there's no answer. So apparently the end is when they run out of money or they own all the land. 37% of the land in Clearwater County, as you move north, it gets worse. 80-some% of Beltrami. In areas up in the Iron Range, 90-some% is publicly owned now. And we're just running out of places to go. Young people have no place to live. Every time you take another section out, property prices go up, property values go up, and it makes it harder to survive. So for those reasons, members, I would ask for a no vote on the Khan amendment.
The member from Beltrami, Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd just rise, Representative Green, if you've heard nothing negative, I would advise you go to the res and talk, and particularly with Chairwoman Bisner. She was in my office right after that vote we took in committee, and she does not support removing this from Lessard Sam.
Representative Khan.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, let me put what Representative Green said in perspective. First of all, if there's such a big concern about PILT, why does it only come up for Indian land? Is that some inherent racism in this body that makes that happen? Now, to say that this is owned privately, and so therefore there's no urgency, denies the fact that the industrial forest landowner is actively marketing for sale more than 1,500 acres of the project site. Let me also put it in perspective what kind of money we're talking about. The amount of the PILT payment that would be concerned with this land is about $12,000. We're looking at approximately, using a little crude arithmetic, which I know this body rebels against considering, but that ends up being exactly just about $1.50 per member of the county. That's hardly a sufficient, you know, if it was in Hennepin County, I'd say it would be less than the cost of a Starbucks. I'm not sure you got Starbucks up there, so it's probably less than the cost of a McDonald's meal. This is excellent wildlife habitat for all species, and the fact that you have this little chunk in the middle that might end up becoming being used for private development is really serious. What's there? Bald eagles, white-tailed deer, ruffed grouse, woodcock, black bear, gray wolf, golden-winged warbler, trumpeter swan, and many more. This creates a contiguous forest land and wildlife corridors adjacent to an existing state wildlife management area and thousands of acres of other state, county, and tribal lands. Expanding the buffer protection, as Representative Purcell said, around the lower wild rice lake is clearly important. This will be new public hunting opportunities for all Minnesotans. I urge members to support the amendment.
The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to correct one comment that Representative Khan has just made, and that is that somehow the question of PILT only comes up when it's Indian land. I mean, my gosh, I've been involved ever since the legacy amendment started in some ways with land purchases. I've been a supporter of legacy bills. And let me assure you all members, I'm also a member of the House Republican Caucus. And if you think that I can sit among these people and only hear comments about Indian PILT land, you're sadly mistaken. I mean, the concern over here on PILT in all land sales is a very real concern, and it has nothing to do with any group or any race or anything.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would Representative Green yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Dean.
So in your comments, you talked about this land disappearing, and I'm assuming land doesn't just disappear, so you probably meant something else. Could you please clarify exactly what you meant by this land disappearing?
Representative Green.
Mr. Speaker, Representative, I meant that it will no longer be available to be purchased by private citizens, young people who may want to move back to the area, people who have been looking for property, who are now stuck in an apartment in town, who want more space to move.
Representative Dean. Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I should have spoken more carefully, as I sometimes don't. The only time I've seen amendments specifically against the legacy bill and against the land purchase on the bill has been when the issue has gone to tribal land, and that's been Fond du Lac 2 years ago, and and now this one on White Earth now. And I will also point out that I have, despite objections from many of the groups that usually support me, the groups that kind of want more land into wildlife at all times, I have supported, along with my good friend Representative Drazkowski, looking into the PILT issue. And in fact, there is some language somewhere in this bill that says that we're supposed to look at the possibility of when we acquire lands that would be susceptible for PILT payments with legacy funds, we can also look at some way to say that legacy funds can then supply some of those PILT payments so that we're not becoming a drain on the general fund in the area. So I apologize if my comment was misconstrued, and if anyone remembers another amendment other than the ones against Fond du Lac and the White Earth, please specifically correct me.
Any further discussion on the Kahn amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 303, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to House File 303 as amended. The member from Hennepin, Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to draw attention to members. There's a letter coming out
from Minnesota Conservation Federation, which details the concerns that the Lessard-Sams Council and the LCCMR have on the provision that takes away their administrative responsibilities, and it's signed by Representative Seltzer and I. Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Wills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I have served on the Legacy Committee for the last term and into this term, and it's one of my favorite committees. I've really enjoyed working with my committee members, and it's been fun working under Representative Kahn the last 2 years and then Representative Urdahl this year. And I wanted to just comment on a couple of projects that are included in this bill that are really important to my community. We have funding in this bill for the Minnesota Zoo, which all of you know is very important to the whole state. It's our state zoo, and I do need to say to the committee members who worked on this, I really appreciate the support of the zoo bipartisanly, and unfortunately we were not able to get their full request in the bill. We have $2.5 million in here, but their request was for $4.5 million. So I'm hoping that in the conference committee we can work to get that number up for the Minnesota Zoo. We also have funding for the Children's Museum, which is a bill I authored to get funding for them, and we included $1 million. And the bill I authored was $1.4 million, so also hoping to continue to work on that in the conference committee. And just wanted to mention a couple of things about the arts and cultural heritage portion that those two projects come from. It's been a huge asset to my community. The Rosemount Area Arts Council benefits. They've been able to get grants through that. And then also the Apple Valley High School has hosted the Velvet Tones and a few different organizations, and as I've gone to those events and I've talked to my constituents, they've shared with me on how important that is and how much they've appreciated being able to do that, and just to see the kids perform in those concerts and the smiles on their faces and the parents excited to see them participate in that. It's just been a great way to bring our community together, so we've really benefited from the legacy dollars in our community, and I'm excited to vote yes today, and I urge members to join me and vote green.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd just like to talk about one of the projects that's in the bill, but talk about the funding for the Southern Minnesota Children's Museum. Tomorrow is the grand opening of the museum. They've moved into a rehabbed bus garage in the center in the downtown area of Mankato. It's really been, it represents a years and years and years of commitment of people in the community to develop a place for children to play. Children to play and learn about their own community, about the region, and that sort of thing. It really represents, in a larger context, though, what I would say in the Mankato area is a multi-generational time period of a sincere commitment to the development of young children, preschool children. And that's what makes this project so special, is that it's more than the facility. It's really an attempt to make sure that all children, new American children, low-income children, are involved with a project whereby they can play and they can learn and they can develop in a very healthy way. There's a lot of people it's a community effort. There's a lot of people that have been on a planning team and a fundraising team, and again, this goes on for years and years. In the opening remarks to the bill, there was reference made to a sense of entitlement. Trust me, the folks in Mankato don't feel any entitlement to the funds through the legacy funds to support the Children's Museum. In the last biennium, the folks received $400,000. In the biennium before that, they received their first funding, again, after years and years of planning and working together to put together the museum, of $225,000 that they received in a competitive grant. As I mentioned, they're opening tomorrow. Grand opening, I'd love to be there, but they're extending it to Saturday, not for me, but it's going to be a 2-day grand opening because they want all the children in the region to be able to come by and see the new facility. There's a lot of excitement. The request, however, this year was for $600,000. And that wasn't taken lightly by the board of the Children's Museum, but was really a very serious request. And the reason the request went up this year is because they are opening now. Compounded with the challenge was they lost $100,000 worth of exhibits in the flood last year. As they were moving, they had stored their exhibits in the basement of a storage facility, and it flooded. And they lost those exhibits. It was a major setback to them. But when they put together the $600,000 request, that was very serious, as they needed to provide to pay for the new exhibits, the opening of this children's museum. So it's really with a lot of disappointment that I see that the request was funded not at $600,000, not at the $400,000 that they requested last year, but at $250,000. And again, this is a project in Greater Minnesota which serves the kids of our region in south central Minnesota. And I know there's competition for those funds, but the timing for this funds was particularly critical. I talked with the director of the museum, and I said, well, what is the impact of that? He said, fundamentally, the impact of that, there will be layoffs in staff that are helping to make the museum run. But what really broke my heart, is that it will force a cutback in what he calls the access programs. He says it will force the museum to strip its access programs. And this is the part of the museum more important to me than the beautiful facility itself, is the idea of giving access and developing access to a growing community of new Americans, and certainly an ongoing challenge of a lot of low-income families in our area. We take a lot of pride in including all children in the learning and the activities of our city, and it was really embodied so well in this museum. I was at a meeting last summer where there were 40 professionals in the community who work together with early childhood programs, who are working to dovetail their efforts with the new Southern Minnesota Children's Museum to make sure, again, that all children will get in there. So thanks for the $250,000. It's critical. It's important. But the request was $600,000, and in this case, it was not seen as an entitlement. It was a distinct need. So it's with some disappointment that we see the funding in the bill with respect to the Southern Minnesota Children's Museum. Thank you.
Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker and members, again, and I speak for many of the members of my caucus who are on the Legacy Committee, we felt we worked hard on this bill. We felt it was a productive committee to be on. We felt that Chair Urdahl was pretty good at listening to us. Of course, we gave you some chances today to make the bill even better than it was, which unfortunately you didn't take. But I'm confident that the process will go on and we can continue working on it, and I certainly intend to vote for the bill.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, I rise to support this bill. I don't have any problem with buying land before it's all developed or raised or whatever. I just want it to be known that today I voted for a bill that would put some of that land aside. In fact, yesterday I was sitting here and got a call on my cell phone I had to go to the retiring room and take, and it was a farmer in southern Minnesota who wanted to sell his land to Minnesota Pheasants, a local club down there, who in turn was going to give it to sell it to the DNR or give it to whatever. And he was very upset that the process was held up, and he didn't want anything in getting in the way. So there's two sides to listen to. And Representative Johnson referred to this as a cut to the museum. I support the museum also in their efforts, and in a different way I'm trying to get some money to them about the flood. But don't think of these as cuts when you get up and talk about them, because it is not a cut. They shouldn't be expected every year. That's the problem with these things. In the Office of Justice Programs in my jurisdiction of the committee, the Public Safety Committee, we run into the same trouble. Whoever we give the money to, even though it's in grant form, and that's one of the problems with OJP, they were given the same money out every year, regardless if the organization was big or small, and all of a sudden they consider that their budget. And they shouldn't. It's a grant, and then they call it cuts. Well, all in all, I support the bill wholeheartedly. Thank you, Representative Urdahl.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Vice Chair of the committee would yield to a question. Representative Heinzman.
He will yield. Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Heinzman, I think there's some good parts of this bill and some not so good parts of this bill. And Representative Urdahl has had the floor a lot today to talk about some of the positive things. And there are a few things I don't know too much about, and I thought as Vice Chair you might want to share some of them. And some of the things that I've noticed in here are buffers, some money for capital art preservation, NPR, an Unsalted Seas exhibit, some portable planetariums, a state band rehearsal space. So, Representative Heinzman, I wonder if you could just share with us some more information about some of those items.
The member from Crow-Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, it was a privilege to sit as Vice Chair on this committee. I was very privileged to have the opportunity to sit next to Chair Urdahl and to listen to a number of the folks that presented over the course of several weeks. And there are a lot of things in this bill that I think that are terrific for the state of Minnesota. A lot of things I think that will be a benefit to people across the state, including my district.
Vote green.
Members, vote green.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if Representative Urdahl then would yield, because there are some positive aspects of this bill, and there are some things that I didn't like the Clean Water Council changes. So I wondered if Representative Urdahl could talk about some of those other items that, from my perspective, really make this a bill that could potentially lead to a positive vote from members. Particularly, I was curious, Representative Urdahl, about the capital art, and I think there are a couple different sections, but there's $2.2 million for capital art preservation, which seems like is separate from what we're doing on the restoration. So I wonder if you could share with us some more about that.
The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Winkler. I actually had written that in my notes and forgot to talk about it. But yes, one of the things that we have in this bill is $3.2 million for fine art restoration in the Capitol. When the bill was, when the appropriation was made, totaling around $270 million, it did not include the art in the Capitol. And one of the real tragedies, I think, would be if we finish this building and then everything's done, but we sit down and look up at the ceiling and see paint chipping off a painting. Now, we have to get that taken care of. And in this bill, there is $3.2 million to do that.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Urdahl, I did have a question about one other. There are a few on here that we haven't heard much on the floor, and these are a lot of good projects, I think, and I wondered if you would answer at least one more question about them, if you would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Urdahl, I also saw $1.4 million for Minnesota Public Radio in the bill. And I'm a big supporter of their work, and I wonder if you could share with us how Minnesota Public Radio intends to spend that $1.4 million.
Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Winkler, yes, under our public radio grant, they will create programming and events, put arts information, musicals, historical, cultural programming online. They do good work.
Representative Winkler.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Urdahl, I do have one more I wanted to get to. This is not in the arts and cultural heritage section, but it was, on page 5, I think there was $4.5 million for buffers, and on page 44, I saw, I think, $16.5 million to the Pollution Control Agency for water quality assessments. And I wonder if some of this money in that bill would help us better understand whether the waters of our state are being adequately protected, and whether the buffers might be the kind of thing that could kind of form the basis for a policy to create more buffers around the state to protect water quality.
Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Winkler, in that particular example that you give, first of all, we do have a state law dealing with berms alongside rivers and streams. And this money, in terms of the governor's recent proposal, doesn't exactly apply to that, but certainly it can be used for those added berms throughout the state. There is money there to deal with clean water, and some of that, as you suggest, could be used that way.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Urdahl, I did have some other questions, and I think there are some other aspects of this bill that it would be helpful as you wrap up to talk to the body about. I'm interested to learn more about the $100,000 for the, I think is it Kajung Funka program. I think the portable planetarium would be interesting to hear more about, and the Unsalted Seas exhibit would also be something that, as you wrap up your speeches, I think it would be good to hear more about some of those spending items that you have in this bill, so that we can maybe get some more members to try to find a way to support this bill despite some of its deficiencies. Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, Representative McNamara, I co-authored the outdoor heritage portion of the bill with you. I think when we went through the process last year, it was a good process. It actually worked the way it was supposed to. We had a debate, and we had a long debate about the provision that was removed in your committee. It's a hard discussion to have on a whole bill, and on both sides of the aisle, I think members have said we need to follow the council recommendations, or we shouldn't carry the council recommendations. I think I even heard within this year's debate we should follow the Clean Water Council recommendations, but not the Outdoor Heritage Council recommendations, because there's just a little bit of a change in the clean water one. Members, if you've said before that we should follow the council recommendations, then you would vote against changing the council recommendations. If you've said before we should not care about changing the council recommendations, then you should vote that way. If you think after 7 years of this, we should get into actually cleaning up our water, Now we've spent millions of dollars on LIDAR. We've spent millions of dollars on various surveys, various soil mapping, all kinds of data in order to make some decisions. Representative Bly referenced kind of the latest study where the Department of Ag itself is finding nitrates in water in their analysis. So here we are, 2015, 7 years after this amendment passed. And we have the annual debate about changing the council recommendations. I want to go back to what Representative Lilly was, and that was about water. At the end of 25 years, are we going to see the needle moved on water? And I think it's becoming somewhat apparent that the answer will be no. The answer will be no if we continue down a path where the interests drive the decision making. We had an opportunity earlier today to keep science in the decision making on the Clean Water Council, but that was defeated. So now we have, as we've mentioned before, interests, people who may be good people who go through the process and apply for this, but they are on the board to represent an interest. But if you're there from the University of Minnesota, nope, don't get a vote. We had a chance in an amendment to take the money for IT work. I think we're going to have to spend some time actually looking at the constitutional language. Protect, restore, and enhance rivers, lakes, and streams, and drinking water. Because the bill spends a lot of money that I'm not sure the outcome is protecting, restoring, or enhancing those waters. But there was a provision that we could have fully funded, and that was the Water Quality Certification Program. A pilot program that is working that we could put more money in and get federal money, but has actually been cut by the Republican majority. Actually been cut when it's only 2 years old. And it provides the choices, it provides the alternative. It's not one size fits all. Now I understand about talking points, but talking points that contradict each other within our own bills, within the session, within each day. A no vote says we could do better. A no vote would say it was wrong to take the White Earth Ban proposal. People who applied, followed the process, went through it just like everybody else, but then were eliminated by the legislature from funding. A no vote would say that was wrong. A no vote would say we need to have science in the decision making. A no vote would say we should fund projects like the Water Quality Certification Program. And Representative Joaquim mentioned earlier there's changes in here on how we do things, continuing to change how the structure is there. Now we can have members stand up and talk about the good things in the bill for their district. That's generally what happens on bonding bills. But I don't think that's what the idea was back in 2008 when we were debating this. We weren't supposed to be talking about what the good thing was in our district. We were talking about the good things for clean water and outdoor heritage, parks and trails, and the arts for Minnesota. So there is more work that needs to be done. I'm going to be voting no. I may be the only one. But that gives at least my statement that you can do better. You can do better than the bill that's there.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I want to thank Chair Urdahl for his very, very hard work on this bill. It is a very difficult bill to put together and to get the votes and to get the support from the varied interest groups together. It is a very challenging committee, as I told Representative Kahn in the last term, that it is a very challenging committee. I appreciate that and appreciate all of the hard work that goes into that. And also, I have been in the past somewhat critical of some of the uses of the monies in the legacy funds. That's not a secret. And I have really appreciated the work that was done by Chair Urdahl, Vice Chair Heidensman, and Representative Green to make sure that the money is spent wisely in the future and that we do have a great amount of money that we're spending, and in putting that money out every year, we want to make sure that that money is not wasted and it's not an embarrassment to the legislature or to the people who voted for that amendment. And we want to make sure that we can stand behind those decisions into the future. And we have seen in the past, quite frankly, expenditures that we would not probably authorize through the chamber if we had it to do over again. So I want to particularly point out Representative Steve Green for his work in making sure that these are funds that actually we would vote for again. I know that when I take my daughter to school every morning, we drive by an old church that has been converted into a playhouse for local community events. Everybody volunteers their time. It's very, very popular. It's the kind of thing that you'd like to be able to say that we could actually get behind and get a grant and have something to help this local folks who really put a lot of time, money, and effort into it. I drive by a library that is really kind of the focus of the community in that area, where we could really see some investments and grants that people could actually use and spend money wisely. And I was turn by the lake, and I would drive by White Bear Lake where the houses are on one side and the lake is on the other side. And I always want to go home that way and come back that way because in Minnesota, lakes are a big deal. And I remember driving by last summer it was like one of the last really nice nights of the summer. And it was a little bit cold and the sun's going down a little earlier. And there was a whole family crowded out on the end of their dock. The dock went out and then it kind of made a T and they had all kinds of chairs out there and everybody was crowded around and the kids were out in a little raft about 10 feet out from the dock. The sun was going down, it was getting cool. But everybody wanted to squeeze that last few minutes out of the Minnesota summer that they possibly could. And they were all gathered around down in the end of their dock. And that's really what Minnesota is all about. And in just that short little trip a mile from my house, I could see why people really wanted this amendment in the first place and why they said, yes, we want to put our money to this good use. But we also want to make sure that that money is used wisely, and I really appreciate the work that was done, especially this year within this bill to make sure that that happens. And so I really want to appreciate and acknowledge the work of the committee, and particularly the good Chair Urdahl.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just wanted to add a little bit about the Capitol art restoration. I have the honor of serving with a number of people on both sides of the aisle on the Capitol Preservation Commission. And you may not know it, but when we were fixing the leaky roof, we acknowledged that we had moisture in this building. We actually had one of our smaller canvases fall down and rip. And taking care of our fine art at this point will save us hundreds of thousands of dollars in the scaffolding that right now fills our rotunda and avoid us having to once again at some point in the future close down the rotunda, block off the hallways to deal with the issues associated with that. And so that's why it was, I think, a unanimous recommendation that we do it now to both save money, protect the safety of the public, and to make sure that we don't have to close down the Capitol again. Thank you. I'm glad it's in this bill.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Urdahl, for your hard work on this, Representative Heinzman, Representative Green, I know, and really the whole committee. There's a couple things in this bill that I really like. It improves water quality and it protects taxpayers. It prioritizes actual water quality studies to improve the quality of drinking water and develop lake and stream cleanup and protection plans. And it protects taxpayers because it prevents previous legacy fund recipients from receiving funds in the future if the legislative auditor finds the recipient did not spend the funds appropriately. Members, this hasn't always been my favorite bill, but we are constitutionally required to spend these dollars, and the Legacy Committee has worked very hard to distribute these funds. This bill will help us be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and it's the legislature's responsibility to make sure revenue from this tax is being put to the best possible use. Thank you, members.
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Urdahl, thank you for letting me be a small part of your bill. Members, I do want to bring to your attention, we got a handout that I think has just got a small mistake. It's no big deal, but I thought I should stand just to correct. One of the representatives from the other side mentioned it's this letter from the Minnesota Conservation Federation. In the second paragraph, it talks about how the proposal removes citizen members from the administrative responsibility. It actually removes all members of both LCCMR in that bill that's yet to come up, and in this bill in Lessard-Sams. It takes the administrative responsibility away from those members, puts it on the LCC, which I think is the right place. Members that serve on Lessard-Sams serve there because they have an interest, usually in the outdoors, habitat, restore, enhance, and protect, which are the three criteria in that part of the constitutional amendment. And that's where we want their talents to best be utilized. I do just want to mention one project. Representative Winkler brought it up, and thank you, Representative Winkler, for mentioning it. On page 5, paragraph F, the Minnesota buffers for wildlife and waters. And actually, the important thing to note is it's phase 5. This is not a new thing for Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. when it says phase 5, that actually means it's the 5th year of this project. It's a great project. Many members would like it that it's an easement project. It's not land purchases, but it's protecting land via easement, which works out real nice. And then another thing I want to mention that's not in the bill that's been a very important bipartisan discussion. Representative Drazkowski, thank you for working and let me work with you on the proposal that we look at when we're buying land, how do we deal with this issue of PILT? I mean, payment in lieu of taxes, which was what PILT stands for, and where do we? Representative Cornish stood up, and Representative Cornish and I have been probably the two most vocal members on this side that really like buying land, and we want to continue to buy land. But we recognize we need to hold counties harmless in that. It's not fair. Representative Khan often mentions that in the one proposal she talked about where the impact was only $1.50 per individual. I actually thought about that and thought, in that county, if it's $1.50 per individual for this one purchase, that would be $6 for a family of 4. And if we have 20 years left, that would be $120. That would be a $120 real estate tax increase for every family of 4 in that small county. And I thought, oh my goodness, we need to deal with this. And if those of us that like the idea that we buy land, let's do it with willing counties and a plan to hold those counties harmless so that we really have an honest discussion. Should we do an easement? Should we do a restoration? Or is the land purchase the right thing? So Representative Drazkowski, I really appreciate, and I want to fight hard for that provision in the tax bill because I think it partners with this bill. And Representative Urdahl, I believe you and Representative Khan are probably the only two people in the legislature that can carry this bill. So you both might have to stick around for a while because this is a challenge for someone to carry. Even though it's all extras, boy, it sure gets a lot of discussion. And thank you for carrying it. I appreciate it. Members, I look forward to a strong bipartisan vote. Thank you.
The member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and congratulations to Chair Urdahl on a fine bill. He's done some very hard work, and he's a fair man who does well. I do have to address a couple of particulars. I'll try not to take too much time. First, Representative Schultz had an amendment to the bill that she withdrew, and I didn't get a chance for my amendment to the amendment, which would actually broaden the perspective on that amendment greatly. There tends to be a focus right now on neonicotinoids, and they are just one of the issues that affect pollinator and bee health. If you talk to the experts, you find that it's a much more complicated issue than that, habitat being a big issue of that. My amendment would have broadened her amendment to make it effective in bringing out a lot more habitat for bees. I think that's very important. The state of Minnesota owns a tremendous amount of land, but we're not doing a very good job of supplying habitat for our pollinators on that publicly owned land, and I'd like to see that move forward. I'd like to congratulate Chair Urdahl for funding the artwork here in our beautiful Capitol. I serve on the Capitol Preservation Committee, and I'm very pleased to see that those funds are being used from the legacy account. I think that's appropriate. Representative Winkler brought up the issue about grass strips along running water, and he mentioned PCA. I just had a conversation yesterday with PCA. You know, we're on this program to carefully test the waters all around the state of Minnesota on a 10-year cycle. The state's been divided up into the 81 major watersheds, and I asked PCA, do they have the information where we can compare one watershed where there aren't very many buffers to another watershed where there are a lot of them? They said they think they can do that, and that if we can find good information that will help us move forward in this issue area, I applaud that. And we wouldn't have that without the legacy money that's been invested in thoroughly monitoring the waters of the state of Minnesota. And finally, members, this issue about the Ag Water Quality Certification Program. I've said from the very beginning that I'm not trying to kill the program. It's been represented here that I'm trying to kill off this program. That is not the case. It's an issue of accountability. It's a great program, but it's not well designed. It's not working well. It's not in a position where it can move out to statewide. If we're going to offer this program, we should have a plan where it can move forward across the entire state. Having this available to only a small number of farmers is not appropriate. We need a long-range plan that works. I haven't seen it yet. There's also questions about the federal money. There may be other spending that we're already doing that will help us qualify for these federal funds. I'm not giving up on those either. So let's work together to make this a better program. Finally, members, thank you for your listening today. Thanks again to the chair. I urge a green vote on a good bill.
The member from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative McNamara, if I stick around 10 more years, that'd be a long time, so Representative Kahn will have to carry on without me. I like to be coherent when I talk, although I have failed from time to time. I may ramble a little bit because of the questions that have been coming up, but I want to just emphasize a few things here. First of all, Representative Hansen said that, you know, this bill needed work. Well, maybe it does, but the fact is, I don't think the perfect bill has ever been before this body. There's probably not any bill that's ever been here that we didn't think we could have made that one better somehow. And let's hope, well, of course, except for yesterday's bill, yes. But there's work to be done on this, I admit it, and that's what we have conference committees for. But I just want to emphasize this as well, that this bill affects pretty much all of you. And you have all constituents who in some way benefit from things in this bill. Whether they fish, hunt, play, people with disabilities, minorities. For example, in this bill there's $2.5 million for Dakota and Ojibwe language immersion programs to help to save dying languages. There's money for Native American burial grounds, $150,000 for osteology. We have money in here with the Arts Board, with the Historical Society, and in all of our counties across Minnesota, libraries, historical societies, and arts boards are putting money into our local communities. You all have things in this bill. Now, and I appreciate some of the questions that Representative Winkler asked, because kind of skim over some of these things. Maybe there are some things out there that have particular interest that you would like to hear about. Representative Schultz, I think you have Duluth. We have the Amazing World of Unsalted Seas exhibit, comparing lakes and wildlife from around the world, and that gets $250,000. We have the University of Minnesota Board of Regents receiving money for the Bell Museum of Natural History that I know Representative Hausman is very interested in. In this, we try to help educate a new generation of Minnesotans to understand our environmental heritage through the outreach that the Bell Museum does throughout Minnesota and the fine work. The Kajug Fanka program. Kajug is a Somali term for stay away. And in this context, it is meant to encourage Somali youth to stay away from drugs, violence, radicalization, or other negative activities, and focus youth toward higher education, civic involvement, and volunteer commitment. We put money into $300,000 into Civic Education Coalition because we do, as I said last week, face a crisis of civic involvement in this country. And we're trying to raise the level of student involvement and civic involvement. And Representative Johnson mentioned children's museums. And we've put significant dollars into children's museums. Yes, $250,000 in Mankato, and it'd be nice to do more. But there's a lot of hands asking for these funds. We had $28 million more in requests than we had money available. And if we were to give the $600,000 to Mankato that they requested, it would have come at the expense of some of these other projects that we're trying to fund. Again, There's no cuts to any of them because you can't cut legacy money. And so, as I said, this is a very good bill. It will change as we go along. It is perfect. It is not perfect. In every bag of candy, you might find a sweet tart. The candy man would say, vote yes, and I urge a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 97 ayes and 31 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Pepin from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bill to be placed on the calendar for the day for Monday, May 4th, 2015, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bill. House File Number 1437.
Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File Number 4. Kelly, Petersburg, Sanders, Howe, and Earhart. Announcement by the Speaker. Speaker announced the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File Number 844. Loon, Erickson, Kreshaw, Detmer, and Peterson. Announcement by the Speaker. Speaker announced the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 888. Anderson S., Albright, O'Driscoll, Loonan, and Lane.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Erickson introduced House Resolution Number 1, recognizing May 7th, 2015 as a day of prayer in Minnesota. The resolution is being referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Announcements. The member from Beltrami, Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to rise here real quick. Earlier today, members, I think everybody, I asked them that they sent an email to everybody, and it's from Ben Goodman. It's an email that talks about 6 of our generals here in Minnesota and the obesity epidemic and how we don't have readiness for our military capability. And I encourage you all to read that. It came in a little before noon, and some pretty serious stuff to think about. Just wanted to remind you, request respectfully that you take a good hard look and work in your communities to overcome that. Thank you.
Announcements. Representative Knobloch.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, the Ways and Means Committee will meet at 6 o'clock this evening in room 200. GOP members will meet immediately after session in room 454.
Further announcements. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Friday, May 1st, 2015.
Representative Pepin moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 o'clock a.m. Friday, May 1st, 2015. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. Representative Pepin. Oh, sorry, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will be no DFL House caucus tomorrow.
Representative Pepin.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Pepin moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails, and the House stands adjourned until 10 o'clock a.m. Friday, May 1st, 2015.